morning, everybody. It's lovely to be here today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Emer Kerr and I'm Client Engagement Director at EduCampus. And I heard a bit of an echo there, I don't know if that's me talking too loudly, but I'm delighted to be here to welcome you all to our second annual EduCampus conference on digital transformation in the higher education and research sector. It is great to see so many friendly faces here today and great to have an in-person event, so I'm looking forward to reconnecting with everyone later. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers here today. So, really looking forward to an engaging and interactive session today, so please do ask loads of questions. Just to do a couple of housekeeping kind of things, so obviously the cloakrooms are outside, the bathrooms are outside to your right, and we do ask as well that you would switch your phone to silent. Okay, so let's just go through our agenda really quickly and we can see what's happening. So obviously we sort of broken the session into sort of two distinct parts. So we have our morning session, our afternoon session. So our morning speakers today are Dr. Joseph Ryan, EduCampus Chair and CEO of THEA. We have Paddy Naughton, who's the CEO of EduCampus, and Ronan Laffan, who's Head of Advisory Services at Version 1. And then we'll have a natural break at around 11:30 to do teas, coffees, and we have some more refreshments outside. And then when we come back in around 10 to 12, we'll have Jason Miles Campbell, who is the Director of GISC for Scotland and Northern Ireland, and Gavin Barber, who is the Deputy Director of Academic and Student Administration at Oxford Brookes. And then we're going to have Ronan Laffan's going to come back on stage and we're going to have a facilitated panel discussion followed by closing remarks from our Chief Operating Officer, Fionnuala Lambert. So just in terms of the questions, as I mentioned, we really want this to be interactive. We really want you to ask questions. We're really encouraging it. We have two, Clodagh and John there, if they want to just do a little shout out at the back. They are going around with handheld mics. So just old-fashioned way, hand up, and they'll come over and we'll get going. Whatever questions, we have time at a lot of each of the presentations to ask questions. And then obviously whatever we don't cover off, we can do so in the panel discussion. So I think that is it. Without further ado, I am honoured to introduce our first speaker here today. He is an advocate and leader in higher education for many, many years. He's also our esteemed chair and CEO of THEA. So please, ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming Dr. Joseph Ryan.
Gribh mágat, Emer agus má ceart I seachtain na Gaeilge is mín love sibh a fáiltiú an seo the Shuddavish EduCampus for what is, as Emer quite rightly says, is our second seminar. And we'll talk about the fact that the first one was 3 years ago. No doubt we'll reflect upon that. You're very, very warmly welcome. And if it's appropriate to issue a welcome through Irish in Seachtain na Gaeilge in our Week of Irish, which in typical Irish fashion goes on for 2 weeks, it's equally appropriate to recognise that today is International Women's Day. And the fact that Emer, as our head of engagement, is the very first voice, a female voice is the very first voice today. And we're blessed in EduCampus under Paddy to have a very young and energetic team and a very balanced and diverse team, which we glory in. And they've done all the work putting this together. So Emer, to you and the team, thank you very much. And indeed, I know this is all overseen also by our Chief Operations Officer, by Fionnuala Lambert, who you'll be hearing from a little bit later in the day. And just again on that question of International Women's Day, you will have seen that the theme for International Women's Day is digital. And again, it's a play on words. It doesn't work quite so well unless you see it in front of you, because it's digit ALL. And it speaks to a number of things. It's not just an Irish piece, it's from the UN, so this is a global piece. And you can see it negatively, which, obviously there is the pressure to have a much better balance within the area of STEM, and that's something that we're all challenged with. But equally, you can see it positively. It's the power of exactly what we're talking about here, digital transformation, to make change, and the power of that. If there were windows here, and there are not, and you were to look out west, you'd see NCI, and you'd see a female president in Gina Quinn. And if you were to look over across the river, where Patrick works, and you were to look there, you'll see a female provost in Dr. Linda Doyle. And if you look further down along the coast, you'll see the president-elect in UCD as Professor Ora Kiley. And a number of us would have been there on Monday when there was a conversation which was hosted, very graciously hosted, I must say, by the president of Maynooth, Professor Eva Lonan, which was the 6 first university presidents, female presidents, speaking in this International Women's Week. And those of us who work in higher education, it seems like yesterday we were noting the fact that there isn't a female leader in higher education. And we're reflecting on the fact that this week, the majority of university presidents are now female. And it's not job done. And I think that's the point Minister Harris would make. But it's a very critical signifier of change. And that question of a willingness to change, I think, is part of what we're dealing with today. And much of that change has happened through COVID. The first seminar that I mentioned was in this building, literally across the hall here, in a room with windows, where we met on this week. I think it was, Paddy, 3 years ago. And I recall that day. I recall coming up the steps, up those escalators, and there was a sense of anticipation of the first seminar. EduCampus is a very young company, and this is the first time of going public, and it was appropriate. Paddy and I discussed this. It was appropriate that we had public conversations, because the company has grown hugely in recent years. That the scope of service, the clientele, and Paddy will reflect this in his own presentation. But also, we were watching, like all of us, we were watching the news. We were watching places like Lombardy. We were watching those military trucks driving in places like Milan and Bergamo. Frightening scenes. And we didn't know what we were facing into on that day. We had lunch, as we will have lunch today. And it was something of the Last Supper feeling about it. I know I had to go and I had to chair a panel the next day, a validation panel for a program in an institution. And I remember that evening we convened for dinner, and the question was, would we go ahead with the panel? And of course we would. We weren't going to let the institution down. But even sitting, one felt slightly guilty sitting in, having dinner together, even with a distance. The next morning, very thoughtfully, the particular institution had provided hand sanitizers and antiseptic wipes. Thoughtful, but you'll notice that masks weren't part of the lexicon then. No one was wearing masks. We didn't know. You'll all remember that day, because that was the day the Taoiseach came on the steps in Washington. And everything, our world changed. And we didn't know what that meant. Did it mean a day, a week, 3 months? We didn't know. For higher education, it was a critical time. And I give great credit to what was then the Department of Education. And as you know, we'd had an election and we had a change of government. And a government was formed in that summer of 2020. And we had for the first time ever, a dedicated department for further higher education research, enterprise, and whatever else comes into that title. I trip over the title every single time, as is the minister, so I'm in good company. We did know that we were in March, so therefore students had gone through the vast majority of delivery. It was unconscionable that we would stop and have a double year the next year, or that industry and enterprise wouldn't have a cohort graduating that year. And the reason I give great credit to the department is they convened very quickly a small group, and we sat weekly in the presence of the minister, basically to see, could we manage the system too? And that group sat right through COVID. I happened to meet Mary Mitchell-Connor at a function earlier this week, and we're just reflecting back on our time. She was minister, the first dedicated minister for higher education. And that was continued by colleagues in the Department of Further and Higher Education, etc., and with the full support of Minister Harris and Minister Niall Collins, which again, publicly I give them credit for the work that they've done. And wearing another hat at the time, what you found that COVID, it cast a light on inequality. We knew the inequality was there, but there was a super trooper placed upon it at that time. And we had stories of, families. You might remember the time we were within 2 kilometers. Don't move beyond 2 kilometers. And you had mums and you had dads and you had any number of children within a house and all around the country, in every country, trying to manage their business, trying to manage their study, trying to manage their life with a limited number of devices, and depending on what sort of broadband. One of the arguments I made very early in that was to bring EduCampus and to bring HEAnet into that conversation at the very earliest. And Paddy graciously came onto that group And I know that Ronan is here as well from HENet. I'm not seeing you, Ronan, but I know you're... Yes, Ronan, thank you. And indeed, your predecessor, Kerry Power, came on. And Ronan did huge work. And I compliment you, Ronan, and your team in HENet, because we moved to a national system, of purchasing devices and then of distributing devices to students who needed them. But even more critical was the provision of Wi-Fi through EduRoam, which moved beyond just the centres of education. It moved into coffee shops. It moved on transport. I gather it's even in here. Not that I could find it. Just to make the point, Ronan. But it did make life so much better, and it helped us through that continuity. And as I was looking for the Wi-Fi this morning, and I found all the local Wi-Fi and free Wi-Fi here, it brought me back to our guest speakers. Because I found Jason Sporran came up on my phone, and you'll get the reference a little bit later on. So Jason, bravo. Yeah, so to Jason and to Gavin, thank you very much for coming in today. Just to say thank you for bringing an international perspective on our doings today. Thank you also, Ronan, for being here from version 1, and Ronan very kindly is sponsoring our lunch later on. So Ronan, thank you for help that goes indeed, for many, many years. We've benefited from that. Well, while we worked through those COVID years, we had done a lot of work through the National Forum, and a number of colleagues here will have worked with the National Forum for the Enhancement of Teaching and Learning. And we had moved towards, if you like, a more advanced approach to that whole question of learning, teaching, and assessment. A community of practice had built up towards innovative assessment, etc. And it was a cultural change that was informing a lot of our doing. But COVID then came, and what was desirable suddenly became absolutely necessary. And it was an accelerator in an extraordinary way. It's one of those moments in life where, there's a crisis which forces you, literally forces you into a totally different habit. To be able to say that higher education responded in a coherent and, calculated manner wouldn't be true. It was haphazard. But there was great genius behind it. There was enormous work from staff, and I see a number of my colleagues as registrars here, and they'll attest this. Staff were enormously inventive, hugely capable right across the system, and it led us then right through to the end of that year successfully, and that was attested by work done by our colleagues in QQI. And the power of technology in delivering that. Through the same time, we went into that COVID, into that first seminar, with a limited number of technological universities. We've come out of the other side with 5 technological universities. These are bedded into national policy. They are anchor institutions within their regions. They're hugely important for the sustainability of those regions, for the attraction of inward investment, for keeping people, retaining people within the regions. But they're multi-campus institutions. So the work that Paddy and the team are doing at the moment in integrating those systems is enormous over the last while. All of those were the positives. There were also negatives as well. And I suspect that will come through in some of our conversations today. I'm reminded of the modern image of the institution, of the college, as we talk about the community university. We talk about the university embedded within its hinterland, and that informs everything. The philosophy, it informs the architecture, etc. But if you go back, if you wander, imagine in your mind's eye you're wandering to Oxford or Cambridge, and you have a historical and a very much admired image of the university, where there are large walls, and there's the protection inside of research and of engagement. And it is the university as fortress. And if you go down the road here, I know Gavin went for a run this morning, he would have gone very close to TU Dublin. I have a number of colleagues here from TU Dublin. Fabulous campus. I was in there last week with the president. Fabulous. And you go up on the roof and look through TU Dublin. It would be very hard for Gavin as a guest here to know where the community stops and where the university starts. And within those walls, there are things like schools. Like it's all intermixed. There's an openness about this. And in my own discipline area of music, it's not that long ago when I remember the argument around the conservatoire, for instance, the conservatoire model. is, very much based within higher education. But there was an argument being made, if you have little primary school kids coming in here with school bags in their back and their lunch in their hand and they're playing the scale of C, does that somehow compromise the idea of a third level institution? And that's not that long ago that we were having conversations like that. So while the image of the university is a much more open, with arms open, inviting people in, we find that within the digital space, we're building walls. And we need to build walls, firewalls perhaps, but walls, because we have had attacks. And we've had attack in one college at the start of COVID. And as you saw, those of you who live in Ireland, you'll see an attack very recently. I give full credit to both those colleges for the manner in which they responded to that. Very, very well done. You'll notice both of them happened at holiday weekends. And just talking to other colleagues, they say they're for the grace of God, so to speak. I also give great credit to Ronan and the team in HENet and to Paddy and the team at EduCampus for the support that they gave in this. But again, that's going to be part of our world as we go forward. I'm looking forward to today's proceedings. I'm really grateful that there's the appetite here to come and be here and join us. Thank you very much for taking the trouble to be here with us today. We started talking about the theme of International Women's Day, and it's that question of the digital, the capacity for transformation that's embedded within that. And that's going to be the theme that I suspect is going to inform everything we say today. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ryan. So I'm delighted to introduce our next speaker, who has been at the helm of EduCampus since our incorporation in 2015. Prior to that, he was involved in senior leadership roles in both the public and private sector, delivering business transformation projects. So I'm delighted to bring to the podium our EduCampus CEO, Paddy Naughton.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, I didn't click you on, Paddy.
Okay, good morning, everyone. And thank you all for joining us this morning. As Dr. Ryan said, it's great to see so many familiar faces and so many new faces as well, and we look forward to engaging throughout the day. Just to digital transformation for higher education in Ireland. Before we get started on that, just want to acknowledge International Women's Day, and all of these are my female colleagues in EduCampus, and they have done from the beginning and continue to make a huge contribution both to the work in EduCampus and across the higher education sector. So just want to acknowledge their efforts and their support and to thank them. Moving on to digital transformation then, really looking at digital transformation and looking for a definition on Google. And if you type in digital transformation, a definition, you get 473 million responses. So I zoned in on one, which was from Wikipedia, and that sets out that digital transformation is the adoption of digital technology by an organisation to digitise non-digital products, services or operations, with the goal being to increase value through innovation, invention, customer experience or efficiency. So I think we can live within that in EduCampus in the work that we do. I'm sure all of us in the room will have our own flavour of digital transformation and how we support it and how we're impacted by it. Just to set out where EduCampus is, and this is with the lens of digital transformation. We're a subsidiary of HENet in EduCampus, and very fortunate to be so. HENet are long established as a shared service provider. I think Ronan, this year's celebrated 25 years in existence. And really are the exemplar in the provision of shared services, and we've adopted a huge amount of the culture from HENet, and we work very closely with them. And across the spectrum of, obviously HENet's focus is on networking and associated services, and that's, just giving you a sense from the point of view of digital transformation. For EduCampus, obviously our focus is on MIS applications and the associated services with those. But looking at digital transformation, we both have commonality really in how we operate across shared services, how we embrace technology and advances in technology, and how we focus on security and work very closely together in managing, I suppose, the heightened security landscape that we all operate in. and data governance as well, just to mention a few areas that we work on. So I suppose under our overall group strategy, we basically plan our way forward, plot our way forward, and determine which services are best placed for HENA to lead out on, and which services are best placed for EduCampus to lead out and work in collaboration, then working together. So Roland Byrne, CEO of HENA, is with us here today, and members of his team as well. I'm delighted to see them. So EduCampus' vision then, our vision is to empower higher education through quality IT shared services. So in one sentence, it sets it out really what we're about. We're about delivering quality in everything we do, in our engagements with our clients, in how we interact with our suppliers, and in the services we deliver. And during 2019, we set about setting out a strategic plan for 2020 to 2024, a 5-year plan. And we set out these themes as how we would guide our way in delivering our strategy and delivering our overall vision. And we put a focus on leadership, that we provide leadership in the services that we provide, and ensure their quality services to embrace modern technology. Growth in the sense of growing our services, growing the organisation, and growing our client base. Collaboration is key to EduCampus. All our services, our service management, our program management, client engagement, are all done in collaboration with our clients because they're enterprise applications. So collaboration is huge for us in how we govern our services and how we manage them. Enabling innovation speaks for itself, that we get a sense of how our client institutions or universities want to innovate and how we can support that. And we want to focus on enhanced shared services, that as we get further established, that we become a partner to our clients, get a sense of the strategy and where each university wants to go and how we can support them as a strategic partner in delivering those services. Look at the strategic plan in a different way. Really, it's supporting our mission, and again, the mission is close to the vision. It's delivering a range of innovative systems and services to meet the needs of the digital age, and to enable it, we have those key enablers of relationship with our clients, partnership with them, external enablers with our suppliers, internal enablers, our own capability, and the values that underpin EduCampus. And also then we have further underpinned by the commitment of the board, and we have support from our stakeholders, expertise from our clients that helps us to decide our direction, how we plan our work, and funding. And from a funding landscape, both HEN and ourselves are governed under arrangements through the shared service unit in the department led by Deirdre MacDonald. And we have excellent support in our from the point of view of funding with operational and capital funding, and also then through DFERIS as well under Keep Minds Watch, very much supportive of our role and our need to support our client community. And then dedication and innovation still of the EduCampus staff, and I think that speaks for itself given the range of services that we've established. The portfolio of applications then, for people that don't know, we provide 5 key MIS applications. Banner, our student record management system, COA and a range of products as our library management system. Unit 4, ERP, is the finance management system, Digitree for student credentials, and Access People then, previously used to be Core HR, for HR and payroll management. So all those services we've been modernising since we started, and they are now hosted in cloud, modern cloud environments, be it BT, AWS or Azure. And that's significant because what it's done is it has de-risked the whole portfolio. It mitigates the risk as much as we can of cybersecurity attacks, and it puts us in as good a place as we can be from the point of view of having a secure environment that we can run our services on. The client community, as Joe mentioned earlier on, first technology university, TU Dublin, came into effect in January 2019. And since then, that was quickly followed by MTU and TU Shannon. And last year we had 2 over a 4-week period, ATU and SETU. Now that transition alone created a huge amount of work for EduCampus, making sure that each of those universities could function from day one as universities. And we've been working closely with them to establish them as universities, support their establishment, and then to get a sense of, well, where do they want to go next? What services do they want to prioritise? And how we can manage the delivery of those services in collaboration with them. And obviously through our engagement with ESBS, Education Shared Business Service, we've quite a range of new clients who've availed of our HR and payroll system, and then Houses of the Oireachtas who've taken our library system. So our client community has grown and diversified hugely over the last number of years. And now that we're post-COVID, we look forward to engaging and looking at our strategy and how we can align our strategic direction to support the objectives of our clients. To support the operation of EduCampus, then we have 3 key competencies established. Strategic initiatives and client engagement. That's really under Emer's watch, looks after procurement, management of contracts, our client engagement and our communications. And we're, believe it or not, coming back in, for those that were closely involved with us in the procurement processes that we undertook when we started, we're back into the cycle of it again. So we're looking to interesting times in 2023 as we kick off some of those. Program management perspective, I think to date we've completed well over 200 projects, and those projects have been done in collaboration with our client community. Huge amount of people involved, huge amount of support needed, and that whole function led by Rory McGinty really has delivered a huge transition and transformation across our client community. A service management then led by Beth Doherty. On a daily basis, Beth and her teams engage with the suppliers, manage the contracts, manage the engagement, and there is escalations to support the successful day-to-day operations. At this point, EduCampus provides services to over 20,000 staff and 140,000 students on a daily basis. So that's spread across, as it is now, 4 universities, 5 TUs, two institutes of technologies, 4 colleges, and the Houses of the Oireachtas as well, from outside of the higher education sector. So huge amount of services, very much evolved since we started, and we're looking to, it continues really evolving on an annual basis. From a transformation perspective, as a company, we've been developing our competencies and capability as well. We started with a focus on really just managing services, managing projects. We've built in process management, process improvements as part of that, and supporting change management. And now we're very much looking at supporting organisational design and organisational development across our client community. So we're looking to ensure that we have the skills in place to operate in that space. Our current horizon, really, as I said earlier, all our services are now on cloud technology. We want to embrace that, maximise the benefit of being on cloud services, continue to maintain our services, and even in maintaining our services, there's quite an annual cycle of work that happens, from the point of view of enhancements required by our clients, changes in legislation, ongoing developments happen on an annual basis. The technological universities, we've merged some systems. We're engaged in mergers at the moment, and we're planning ongoing discussions in relation to initiating further mergers. So there's quite a lot of work to do to continue to build and support the establishment of technology universities. And in new clients, as new clients join us and avail of services, how we incorporate those new clients, how we build our governance with those clients, and how we manage those deliveries is a focus area for EduCampus on an annual basis. The future horizon then is then looking across the landscape of what our clients are focusing on, digital infrastructure. And digital infrastructure from the point of view of supporting multi-campus universities, multi-campus environments. Research and entrepreneurship is an area we'd like to get into, supporting research and providing technology solutions to support that. Digital learning experience. I think out of COVID, as Joe mentioned earlier, there's a recognition that learning no longer happens just solely in the classroom. It needs to be supported by a full-on digital ecosystem to support blended learning and blended access to education, and we're very much looking to support that. And then horizon planning and looking at new technology monitoring with our clients and seeing where they want to go and how we can support them and support their objectives and their ambitions. And how we're going to do that in EduCampus is really it's an alignment of our digital strategy with the strategy of our clients, and how getting an understanding of how our strategy needs to align with the university strategies and how we can support their objectives. Ensuring that we have the capability to lead strategic programs, Working on the governance to make sure that the governance is appropriate. Obviously, we have a lot of moving parts, a lot of parties involved when we're implementing systems. You know, we have suppliers, we have those relationships with the with universities and their internal governance and all of that. And we've got to make sure that we establish that well with our clients. And then sustained stakeholder support, close engagement with the departments, close engagement with the stakeholders to ensure that we have sustained funding model that will fund our capital programs and deliver on the ambition that we have both for ourselves and for our clients. Okay, so that's it for me. Was there any questions at this point on EduCampus, or do you want to leave them till later?
Okay.
All right, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Paddy. Okay, so next up we have Ronan Laffin, who's Head of Advisory Services at Version 1. And Ronan is no stranger to the topic of digital transformation, innovation, and has led out on several modernisation programmes across all of his Version 1 customers, and both in the public and in the private sector. So Ronan's going to set the scene for us today on digital transformation and talk about some of the challenges that we face as a sector. And we look forward to your insights, Ronan. So welcome aboard.
Right. Gur míle maith agus más féidir am tosnú as gailge just díreach fechant céir táid leir faoi. Táid leir faoi athrú digitach, okay? Ach beidir athrú ní focail róha é, beidir tras irmú, beidir focail níos fearr úsáid an seo. In other words, we're talking about digital transformation, right? And there's lots of definitions, and I'll talk about some of this and then I'll bring it back to the sector. Look, I'm a techie, I'm not an educationalist. I don't come from having an academic background in that way, but I've been operating in many sectors, including education, through my 21 years in Version 1. The key words that we're interested in here, probably, we all focus on the digital, and let's talk about that because that's important. But the transformation and finding the actual meaning of transformation, that's probably the key thing here. And the challenge for everybody in the room is the transformational aspect. So when I, in Irish, use the word athrú for transformation, that means just change, right? But we kind of need to dig a little bit deeper than just change, transform, change the shape, trasirmú. That's where we're really looking at as truly transformational in it, and driven by digital, driven by the opportunity that the technology that we now have in front of us presents to reimagine what that institution is. And so when Joe talks about, you know, the walls of Oxford and inside of the walls, actually we have this amazing opportunity to reimagine the shape of those walls, to actually make them truly virtual and to reimagine how we deliver what it is we deliver for students. So let's talk about that. Let's go there and see what we're talking about. Something magic happens. So this definition of digital landscape, what does it mean? Well, here's a Gartner definition of digital. The dominant use of the latest digital technologies, so computer technologies, to improve organizational processes, interactions between people, organizations and things, to make new business models possible, okay? And actually the key thing here is really always going to be people. And when we're talking about education, it's students, it's learning, and it's also understanding the role of education for the wider economy, the wider good. That's why we exist in terms of, that's why we have the institution in the first place. And the question is really one of, where does digital play into driving that? And we have to use the opportunity to move away from the physical walls, the physical barriers, the physical approaches that we might have had in the past. And I guess COVID has been the single greatest accelerator we've had that's forced our mindset change. But that's what we need to think about as to what this art is possible. And you're not unique. Every industry is driving toward this transformation. And at the same time, every industry is challenged by what that actually means. So, you know, there's various metrics out there. 70% of CXOs, chief operating officers of various kinds, don't have confidence in their organizations to actually pivot and adapt. Okay, that's from a Deloitte report in 2001. or 2021. 53% of business saying creating a corporate culture that better supports digital efforts is the top priority. So we're all trying, lots of people are trying to do it, okay, but absolutely not quite sure how we do it. And it's a huge challenge because most people in every organization have day jobs to be lecturers, to be administrators, to be librarians, to be financial controllers, and day jobs that are about delivering a core service, and their mission is to deliver that service excellently, efficiently, as best they can. And yet there's these awkward people on the side, people like me, going, we need to reimagine the model. And they're going, I need to deliver my job effectively. And somewhere in here, we need to occasionally challenge ourselves. That's why it's nice to have a day out like this, to ask the questions as to what you do and how you might do it, and challenge, could we do it in a totally different way? Could we restructure ourselves? Could we change our priorities? Could we use technology to drive that change? As I go, if anybody wants to ask me a question, ask the question as you go, right? This is partly a conversation. Yes, I've loads of slides and I can talk, but if you can ask a question, I'd love it. Inject, could be troublesome, all of that. There's also themes that come out when people talk about digital, right? We want to be strategic. We want a digital strategy, whatever that actually means. And then they start saying, well, what would the kind of nature of the organization or the technologies, the things we put in place, what the nature of those might be? And invariably things like, well, we want a fairly modular approach, so maybe we can swap things out in the future, and that sounds sensible. But that's both systems, but it's also maybe the way we do things, might be business processes. So flexible, adaptable, allowing to change. There's also a typical enabler which is important, which is standardization and simplification. And it's important as we move towards digital. In one sense, the world continuously gets more complicated. The technology, we always are putting in more technology, right? But if we don't continuously try for simplification and standardization, then we're probably going the other way. So it is something that has to be into the mix. And if we want to use things like off-the-shelf software, particularly cloud services, we will often have to go to vanilla in part, but we must recognize where the uniqueness, and it can be the uniqueness of where we decide our positioning in as an institution is. It might well be, how do we express that? Is that something in the student experience? Is it a particular focus on particular verticals in terms of learning or educational experts or whatever? But there may be aspects where we go, we standardize over here, but this is where we differentiate ourselves. Invariably business value led, and that kind of, in education, it comes back to student first or education first or outcomes. We're looking for outcomes. That's why we exist, and the digital capability should force us to refocus on what it is those business value outcomes that we're trying to generate are. And look, after that we have to be pragmatic, we have to live within our means and budgets, and at the same time continuously transform that to build some flavor of maturity in how we do this. So pragmatic, yes, but at the same time strategic in understanding what are we building out. And as I said, outcome focused is really where we end up with. So digital, yeah, it's got a computer, right? We're going to replace this ancient old system with a nice shiny new cloud service, right? It's got a computer in it, it's digitized, right? That's not a particularly useful thing. We've been doing that for very, 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 very many years, and that's not really what we mean by digital. We really come back to trying to think a little bit more deeper than it's got a computer in it, right? We're over that. So transformation, that word, the transformu, the afro, a market change in form, nature, appearance. We're looking for something that goes in some fundamental way that changes, delivers something, and does reimagine the fact that we don't have to have physical walls. We might not all be in the same place at the same time. What can we do? What's really interesting in this sector, the kind of sectoral transformations that have happened, like the formation of the TUs, there are huge opportunities that is bringing in the structure that's in there. So we've gone from having, clearly different colleges delivering very equivalent courses in different locations, and some of those are now brought together into a single institution. So we get to structural questions of to whether we can share and repeat, or whether we can deliver some of that remotely, or or whether there's pieces within that where we specialize and differentiate. And so we're coming to structures that in themselves don't look like the traditional single institution, the single campus, the single walled. And there's great opportunity to go with that, with the fact that our students, they're could be challenged by rent pressures and getting accommodation in the first place. But actually, you know, the TU sector or the IT sector before it, has been very successful in supporting people through alternative paths of learning, not just straight to a degree program, and, you know, the multiple paths and the industry engagement and people in continuous education as they work and supporting industry locally. Well, we have now this outreach structure with institutions that have, on one hand, huge challenges, huge distances. And if you take ATU, you know, we're going from Letterkenny to Galway to Mayo to, you know, huge distances across. But actually the opportunity that brings is massive. And I'm very conscious that one of the things that COVID did for us is it forced us to say, oh, we can deliver lots of this stuff digitally. Might not be optimal, we might have been forced. Absolutely, the learning experience had all sorts of issues in it. But equally, the opportunity of the transformation, and take that alongside the institutional transformations, the ability to reach people in different ways, that's clearly something that is truly important. So we must imagine this, that we can look at it in different ways. And that's a very nice picture of the bends upside down in the lake. And, you know, that's kind of the art that actually, looking at things in that different way, the reflection that technology actually allows us to see, maybe there's something totally different that we can do. And transformation is the most difficult part. Digitization, just in terms of simple definition, sticking a computer in it, okay, convert it into digital, that's the easy bit. And somewhere along the way, we get to digitalization, we change about the process and we start focusing on something more about the processes than just about we've got a computer in it. But the actual transformation is the impact of that. It's understanding the outcomes that we deliver and all of those. And that's really where we need to be, and the mindset we actually need to be in. So it's easy to talk about we'll replace one system with another. It's hard to talk about we structure ourselves differently. And because we're talking about business, we're actually really not talking about technology. But we have to understand that technology to imagine what the business could be. I use these kind of principles to describe digital because I don't like describing it in terms of bits and bytes, right? If I talk about it in the computer, the IT system, I'm probably talking about the wrong thing, because these are the things, if you think about them as principles, they're the things that allow us, when we say we're going to replace or we're going to change the process, they allow us to actually challenge what's different. So on the one hand, versus previous generations of things, there's a huge dominance of user-centric thinking and design thinking that goes into modern system design and development of digital systems. And if I was to put it in the education space, it's student-centric, absolutely, in terms of imagining the course structure, the engagement from when they first, you know, express an interest in particular courses, going through the CAO, the admissions process, through the educational process and awards, and all the way through the full life cycle. Imagining it to be about the people we serve, the students, the learning we generate, the knowledge, all of those things, as well as the other parties that are in the mix, so the others we engage with. Typical systems are open in a way that maybe previous generation wasn't. Now open with boundaries and security, and all of those cyber threats have to be managed. But actually imagining that openness allows us in the future to have the flexibility to rewire, replumb these in different ways. That's what openness is important in these kind of system designs. There's a piece that's emerged in digital is absolutely things that's driven by data. There's an awful lot of talk about data. Data-driven, intelligent systems, AI, but it's all about data. And as we shift, it's not just simply about catch the information, stick it in a computer, a human types it in, a human gets it out, we run a report, here's our list. It's actually making systems that are more interestingly intelligent, uses the data, and probably connects into other systems that can then use the data. So it might not be within our bounds here, but that openness is the interconnections, which allows things like automation of processes. It removes some of the drudge work. But talking outside, it was earlier on at coffee outside, somebody was discussing how a particular scenario of a payroll system and a finance system still having to be manually replicate data between the two of them. and we're laughing at, couldn't you export it to a spreadsheet and get it into another off a spreadsheet? But we still have silos of information, even in every part of every institution, and education is not unique, where automation of the integration, the data, the openness, it's essential. One little topic of digital first, the thought process of imagining when we start our new processes and we start new inventions and new inventions in business, new inventions in org structure, all of those, but imagining things as digital first, imagining engagement in that way, which is forcing us to ask this question before we start. That's part of how you get there. And then there are other characteristics that kick out. One is that we used to do all this in nightly batch, monthly batch, whatever it was. We push data from one thing to the other. We do a process once a year, once a month, once whatever. And actually, there's definitely a trend, and we see it in software design, we see it in SaaS applications, we see it, this total trend to real-time integration. But real-time data being available, how are we doing? Real-time, not last week, not last night, not yesterday, not whatever. But actually, as a philosophy, sometimes it doesn't make any difference to some of the processes, but as a philosophy, it's a rigorous thing to do, because actually there will be things that allow intelligence, that will allow us to plug other things we haven't even thought about together yet, that could sit and integrate and improve these processes and automate things, but only if we always begin to make it a repeated principle. We'll make it real time. Why wouldn't we? Well, we used to do it nightly. Yeah, just make it real time. And it creates an art of the possible, of things that possibly we haven't even considered today that are part of that. And a big piece of that is the intelligence. The intelligence is a big piece that kicks in. If we're pushing the data around continuously into different parts, it allows us to begin to plug in things intelligence. And I'm not talking, mega AI. I'm talking systems that can help us make decisions. Some of the intelligence is helping a human to be intelligent and make good decisions. And some of it is, we will get into the land of AI. But actually, for the moment, we're mostly in the land of providing good information that allows you to make better decisions in a timely way, and being able to be flexible how we plumb those together. So there's just bits and pieces that it helps me when I look at something and say, is somebody truly thinking in a digital way, having a sort of, what do I mean by that? You get a set of characteristics that allows me to challenge, to say, no, there's something niggling at me here. You're really replacing one system with another, but you're not really delivering transformation, and you're not really going to live up to the things that are emerging on the whole in industry as opportunity, as change, and this is true in every. And that's why that sort of helps and is important. As organizations, imagining our foundations, there's aspects like having a strategy, having core architecture that thought through, having ways of actually then designing those systems, and having within that, knowing that there are certain core applications, and EduCampus provide a set of applications that many of the institutions here use, so be it for Banner or your finance system or your library system or other things like that. There are core applications, different parts of our domains that absolutely are to that. But typically there's other pieces in the middle that we're not today providing as shared services, but actually are kind of foundations to that. And some of those are where you differentiate within your organization. Some of them are strategic and some are tactical within your organization. But the idea of things like low-code platforms or other ways of gluing together or differentiating within your organization, that's part of the thing to imagine. It's not just that you have a library system. It's not just that. But we are also supporting other needs of researchers, and some of that we're connecting out to other services, that's fine, but there may be other aspects by which we manage the content we create. We provide repositories that are searchable. We provide dictionaries of previous research. We provide lots of different tools that are in that research space. And then there will be niche software that you're providing that absolutely meets the needs of a particular faculty or school that has, is about medicine or other things like that. Now, some of the software that we can provide as platforms by design will be common. They're standards. But some of them, and maybe schools of medicine might be a good example, they might have really odd, complicated rostering needs because they're putting, medical students out into a hospital context it's just outside of your bounds of your control. It's not simply putting people into a class or into a tutorial or into some other kind of context like that. So you'll end up with an organization which has some core platforms. In some cases, you'll have parts of your organization which is a bit sort of, that doesn't meet my need. But we need to still plug them into the overall context. So design and imagining that whole is important. And so that's where we come through. So the aspects of that's sort of the foundations by design as distinct from by accident. And future thinking, even though we all recognize you can't just replace everything straight away, but it's beginning to imagine what's the shape of things. That is important. When we look at other sectors, there's a lot of lessons that are kind of important to take and to understand. The UK public sector has been quite good at imagining the role of digital. And so they have government digital standards, GDS, which sort of applies to all the development of all sort of IT investment, digital investments across public sector in the UK. And they've set a lot of standards and they've done a lot of thinking and they've published a lot of information. But this is one that I took which was quite interesting in terms of things that they said had been successful or a thought process that had been applied that actually allowed success, and equally things that had been less successful. So they saw concepts like get a minimum, there's a lot of term of MVP, minimum viable product. It was like, get a minimum lovable product, something people will actually say that was worthwhile out the door, which includes having the techies in the room as well as the business people brought together, right? But a minimum lovable product. In other words, the first thing you launch, it has to be worthwhile. Viable, it's kind of, it might be a lot worse than what was there. We could live with it, but because we all know that what happens is if it's not loved, people start axing the budget before we get to the next thing, right? So there's things like that kicks out. They absolutely have gone in the UK, all in for cloud, in a way that Ireland is only beginning to think about, and that's true at central government. Systems of all kinds in central government have been built for the last 5 years more on public cloud. That is the default. They've gotten out of the conventional hosting. They've moved 100% to public cloud. And that includes adoption of SaaS, as can be student management systems and finance management systems stuff, by default, SaaS, right? We've been involved in University of Birmingham, places like that, where really large-scale implementation of SaaS technology has been part of the core. Right? Within that, driving APIs to allow reuse and exposing things and allow things to be composed in a different way, focus on the user, focus on the user interface, and take data back out of what they do. And GDS is very strong on saying, for everything that you do, you need to work out before you start what the metrics of success are and work out and report on those metrics as you proceed through. So the exemplar projects have portals where they actually publish their statistics, the usage, the success criteria against what was previously agreed before they started as part of the process, which is quite interesting, very open in a way that we haven't seen here. And absolutely believers in Agile. So when we started with that minimum lovable product, actually it isn't meant to stop there. It is meant to continue to get funding, to continue to transform and deliver based on what next is going to deliver value, which might not be what I thought before I started the project. There's a lot of things in their gaps. Failure to leverage scale, failure to quality issues, failure to deal with the legacy and technical debt. These are things that strangle you. And another key piece about data, missed opportunities leveraging government data sets or leveraging data in the first place. So a bunch of things there. It's important to look at our peers. It's important to look at other people's experiences. It's important to take it forward. I guess here, looking at ourselves in terms of the factors that are driving ourselves here, we have technology evolution. We have structural changes like the TU formations. We have had this COVID experience, and for want of some of it really, really good and some of it really, really bad, but actually there's a whole load of drivers that come from that. There are other industry trends like lots and lots and lots of talks about micro-credentials, but at the same time, not really putting it together to say, well, how's that actually going to work? How's that actually in the context of, say, for example, TUs that create very flexible structures? Can we genuinely take micro-credentials and use it with people who are coming from industry and still in the workforce, people who are returning to education, people who might do some modules in one of my colleges within my IT and take other ones centrally, or other, move through the system. Or, shock horror, move between institutions. I think most institutions think of themselves and they can imagine, as we form as a TU, how can my students have a TU central in inner experience? But the real question should be, how can we move within the sector and recognize the achievements and the furthering of our total education across institutions? That's really where we get to other questions like, how would we weigh these things up and count them and put them together? Sounds like a national level question and equally a business level question. Obviously, there's lots of legacy that has to be replaced in lots of cases. We have a set of students and staff who have expectations that are high expectations. So every day they're on their phones. We're all on our phones when we come in here checking this, that, and the other. We have this personal life that's totally digital and driven off that. And we have that expectation. We bring it to, and then we get a very grey experience in lots of cases, which can be a bit disappointing. But there are institutions who have called out, I wish to differentiate my student experience with the digital delivery, the digital experience. For some institutions, that has been a conscious thing that they have addressed and are setting out there. But it's all still a challenge, though, to make that real all the way through, right the way through, counting the academic achievement and the delivery and so on like that. But there are institutions setting digital as part of the agenda. And a key factor is everybody has demand for data, whether it's at policy level or driving operational efficiency, just looking after, making sure that I'm doing my job. Everybody has a demand. There is a universal demand for data. And in terms of, there's a bunch of barriers there already discussed, cyber, and huge threats and things like that. And the one thing I would say is that cyber probably should be put on the left as a driver, in the sense that, what's your alternative? Well, it mightn't be pointing at certain people it might be pointing at Ronan or pointing at Paddy in terms of cyber, because actually the data was sitting in a spreadsheet that got emailed and it never went to any near core system and it got emailed off the campus, or somebody's machine blew up and all that sensitive research data they had was lost, but it never comes up to be a national level problem. They're the real cyber things that are going on. So when we get to cyber, it actually is one of the drivers as a thing from just a barrier. It's often put up as a barrier, but actually it should be considered to be a real driver. The harder things are change, and I've talked to a number of those pieces in there. I guess COVID has been an amazing thing, definitely accelerated us. It definitely got lots of remote learning and remote operations and proved that these digital technologies could be adopted really fast, and lots of things were digitized that had not been digitized. But there's a real fear that actually it's treated as a tactical. That was an experience. It was bad. And let's get back to without actually asking, well, what was good about it? And lots of things were good about it. And some pieces were bad. And actually understanding how do we bring that flexible model that was in there, but equally bring it into the physical environment. That's really the art of remembering what did we learn, assessing the bad and the good, and getting people to commit to those new ways of working. It's very easy to fall back into, we're back in the lecture theatre, we're back in the classroom, we're back in the tutorial hall, we're back in the physical assessments, we're back in all of those things, and not to actually address those things. So some of the kind of things that come off that are, multimodal sort of learning, multimodal delivery, flexible educational access. There's a lot there. Some of it works really well. Some of it has problems for at least certain cohorts of students, certain cohorts of equally staff. And we get to problems and questions like equity and fairness. Fairness of digital access is absolutely not a given. And socioeconomic backgrounds and even just there's a variety of aspects to equity and fairness that are really important. And a huge topic that's really important is that the the education experience, the traditional education experience in institution, there's an enormous amount that's about community. There's an enormous amount that is of value that is in the social experience, the fact that students come together and engage as people. And you could kind of say, it nearly doesn't matter what you're taught, right? You learn so much within the institution of going through the student experience that is maturing and brings people and prepares people for working in a collaborative workforce in the future, right? You can nearly teach them anything and they would still learn so much that's of value. And that educational experience, getting a balance between the digital or the virtual delivery and the real importance of those other skills that are learned through the physical, getting the balance of that, it's really essential. Now, there's lots of different ways that can be done, but it is really important to remember that. And obviously, some students suffered enormously through the whole COVID experience, and dropout rates in particular areas really, really difficult. So it doesn't work for everybody, and for some people, they absolutely thrived in it. But there are aspects still of the social experience that is so valuable that actually, we're not talking about just make it all digital and it's all done. Absolutely not. It's the how do we bring things together. There was a session held in October that I was very honoured to chair with the joint advisory group that is taken from the group advisory forum taken from the boards of both EduCampus and HEAnet. And what we did an interesting exercise, breaking the groups into 4 discrete groups, looking at 4 aspects of digital and digital transformation. Looking at the student experience, looking at the university as a university academic, the teaching experience or the teaching needs, looking at university services, so be it administration or library or other people who provide some of the supports within the university institution. And then equally looking at the system view, the national view, the department view, as to what does this digital transformation thing need. And there was a lot of output produced, some of it on bits of whiteboards and whatever like that. But the real thing that was done was a conversation, a set of conversations, a set of domains focused on particular areas. It was very valuable and very insightful, and especially as it was probably the first of those groups happening post-COVID, where people were in the room together and really coming together and reflecting on what had come through in the previous two and a half years. Looking at the student journey starts, eventually gets into our institutions in some way, and they come through admissions, and we teach them in a variety of different ways, and eventually we assess them, or we assess them continuously, we give them some flavor awards, and they go on through their life cycle to be alumni, to be people in industry who might equally be looking for students back out here, or looking for research, or looking to come back and do further education themselves. And of the topics that emerged, key things in terms of student journey that really took away from the student journey or caused huge challenges along the way. Huge focus on the need for connected systems, kind of chewing on that, and actually really connected processes that actually the student, I shouldn't care about what systems you have, right? But they do care about the fact that they're engaged in a process with you, an education process, an education life cycle through, and actually that needs to be student-centered. It's not centered on yourselves, it's got to be centered on the student, on their experience, on their process. There is a huge diversity of the student experience, and that's across lots of different aspects within the curriculum, within how attendance, they should have flexibility. We should have flexible education models. We had it within the IT sector, and it's something we need to absolutely retain, enhance, and actually the TUs should be seen as an opportunity to give us even further opportunities for flexible delivery models and flexible learning channels within those delivery models. So digital alongside physical, and alongside even things like students coming together, the value of students, even if it is a remote learning, coming together as networks to actually enhance their own experience in learning. Maybe the course has got modules that are delivered totally virtually, but they may still come together it might be related to the local institution, but maybe that same course is delivered across multiples of those institutions in the UTU structure. But we can still use those to bring together communities. And it's again, that sense of community was considered to be hugely important in the student journey, the student experience. And so things like micro-credentials and lifelong learning and diverse entry paths, they really are essential to the future that digital needs to enable for what it is in the student. From an academic perspective, again, look, the academics they don't care about the CAO, they don't care about, but they do care about other things downstream. Collaboration with peers in different institutions, the leading of, be it research labs or whatever, research groups, whatever they're doing, and funding of those things. You've got other sort of topics that start to emerge, as well as, absolutely, they are key to the delivery of core educational teaching, assessment, and all of the rest. Again, the focus and what the art of the necessary was the automation and the integration of administrative processes that they're engaged in. Intelligent use of technologies, connect the technologies together and allow them to do what they're trying to do as an academic instead of being embedded into deep, inefficient, ineffective administrative processes. And that concept of multimodal and self-directed learning, but giving them the tools to empower them to say, yes, you can deliver your course in this way, and you can be flexible to the needs of different students, and it doesn't have to be the traditional delivery model, and actually being quite supportive through the technologies and giving them the enablement to deliver that to students. That absolutely is a key topic that emerged, and equally, the importance of data to the academic, the single version of the truth, of the record associated with the student, their learning, their academic achievement, all of those things. And the fact that some of these things get said tells us, because that's not the way it is at the moment, right? It's not that it's magic, but it's actually very simple. People are looking for a simple experience, an efficient experience, accurate data, single version of the truth, and a view of the student. And in terms of other aspects, there is a need to have shared digital infrastructure and access to it. Not every lab needs to invent its own IT infrastructure. We need to leverage shared infrastructure for efficient delivery of research, etc. And from the university services, again, the same topics emerge: the automation, the security ecosystem, the need for consistent data. All of these things are key, and they've got, obviously, a whole load of different concerns and considerations and domains that go across that they're trying to drive. And within that, there's definitely a big shift. There's a big shift to cloud and these IT systems, a big shift to software as a service. That removes things they used to have to worry about. But equally, it highlights, a lot of these things are going to be dependent on having accurate data and data services available to underpin these things. And if we shift to SaaS, we have to retain our data in some way, because otherwise we can't connect it all together. So flexibility, absolutely key. One other topic that kind of came out, which was that need for something which is joining together the data about the student. So lifelong identity, lifelong learning achievement, and connecting of those things. That's kind of a national level, connecting the data that we have in our institutions back out. And I suppose that was the other piece to looking at the national level. And from why are we here as educationalists? What are we trying to deliver? Well, some of it is we've got lots of needs that we're addressing for the student and for the wider economy and the wider society. And some of the things which we know are sort of constraints or policy or things we're trying to achieve in terms of equity and effectiveness, use our money efficient and efficiency, right? Absolutely, that those are topics that come out. But there was highlighted repeatedly the need for common definitions and common standards, educational or even process standards, that we can talk about stuff in the same way. And that drives out to the need for common data standards. So yes, there is data reported annually back out to the department, but actually we're really, really limited in what data we push back out. And actually there's a real need to standardize what it is we talk about in data, and a need to connect data around the individual, around the student, around and draw that data together in a better way. And a need to have that data in a more timely way, not just get your data once a year in a particular legacy format. So we're quite old in the technologies that exist at department level, quite old in our thinking about data. And actually, really, this hasn't moved forward, and it needs to jump, not just one step, it needs to jump radically forward in the thinking and the connections to the institutions in that. And that requires engagement across all the institutions, the educational institutions, as well as the other organizations, be it HEANet and EduCampus, CAO, and other bodies who are involved in the whole structure. And one topic that kind of came out, so yeah, we need flexible delivery model, but equally we need to start thinking about sort of our own reference architectures. And yes, there are some global ones, but what's interesting to me is we don't really have good reference architectures, reference data models that we talk about, which would allow us more easily to say, in this institution uses this system for this piece of the life cycle, and that institution uses the other one. But you can plug them together because they talk the same standard. And that goes on to meet the need for data at the departmental level. Or this faculty has plugged their own one in because they have a different need, because they are the School of Medicine and they've got different needs, right? But on the whole, the next layer up in that same institution can happily take data from these and bring them together, right? We're not really there yet. We're not really working in that way. So a variety of different topics coming out. Just going to finish with two themes, and I'm trying to slightly rush through these, but just to finish with two themes just to consider. So I've talked, right, all the rest. These are kind of general things that are emerging. Every time we start doing transformations, we have to start asking other questions. And sustainability, and particularly looking at sort of the UN sustainability goals, they actually are now part of the agenda in everything that we do. So, you know, considering what does that mean? We're talking about IT and transformation. Well, ESG as a concept, environmental, social, and governance as themes, and the 17 sustainable development goals set out by the UN actually sort of become part of every time you make an investment, right? And I mean, today, obviously International Women's Day, and we're talking about gender equality. And I'm going to look at myself and my industry, and maybe it's reflected partly and being echoed by the speakers. We have in our industry a major challenge with diversity and balance, and you know, it's male dominated. But equally, there are other aspects of diversity that we could equally challenge. You know, I was looking at an internal team structure diagram there last week within one of our teams, and I realized that there was a different type of imbalance within that team. We had a lot of Irish and English names at the top leadership level, and we had a huge diversity of international names at the delivery, the developers, the whatever, right? Okay, and so we have lots of ways in which diversity is emerging. What's important about diversity from the point of view of designing digital systems? We actually have to bring an understanding of the people we serve, and you know. Okay, obviously International Women's Day and we have a bunch of male speakers, that's a problem. But that's a problem in the sector, in the IT sector. We have an audience here who is very, I'm going to say white Irish and white Northern European, and actually we have a much more diverse student population than we had in my day in college. And actually we need to make sure that we reflect the diversity in our understanding, in our thinking, in our thought process when we imagine the future. And so diversity is quite important to have embedded across the organization, across IT leadership, across business leadership, so that we reflect who it is that we serve and we understand their needs and we properly address it. So it's not just a casual thing, it is really, really important to imagine the future. As an organization, we have a whole large program around ESG, and it goes from environmental side to how we engage in social things. We have a whole strand around women and technology, but actually we still struggle to bring forward, say, to architect level, people to be technologists, female technologists. We have great PMs, we have great commercial people, we have great people in different parts of the business, but actually we see the people in certain areas, we see imbalance. And I, it has to be looked at consciously rather than accidentally. And it's part of how we structure for transformation. We must do it consciously rather than accidentally. And this isn't just, something that you can ignore. Every time you go out now and procure, actually, these considerations have to be how you procure. So it could be services for people like us. It could be IT systems. It could be other flavors of services you procure. You must include ESG considerations in it. So they become part of what you are assessing and weighting. So 5% social considerations, 5% environmental sustainability, but they go back to the UN goals. It's in our green procurement, and the UK is the same. It's 10%, I think, give or take ESG. It's a topic that can't be avoided, but it's not just procurement. It's for how do we actually reflect the needs of the students in front of it. And what I would say, when we have an option in front of us, if we're going to consider something, we've got to consider these. It can be environmental as well as other aspects of it. We have to look at the options for every solution. We have to imagine the impacts of the different options. We have to go back to say, if it's environmental or other, we have to sort of say, yeah, this one is better in different ways. It's not just purely the conventional business process, the transformation we deliver. So if we are going to deliver things digitally, options, will it save, will it improve, will it be equitable, you can use those goals as ways to assess different pieces. And you should be assessing the options in investment programs against those ESG goals to say, yeah, this one scores better in this way, as well as meeting the core functional requirements. It's just another pieces that we have to do. The one thing I would say is that when we consider, particularly in for example, environmental matters, the business process, not just the IT system, business process, the change we make in that's where we make the biggest impact, and digital transformation we deliver. Right, I'm going to finish with one last bit. This is about tech, isn't it? Shouldn't I be talking about tech? And you couldn't talk about tech and not talk about ChatGPT. Okay, yeah. What's interesting to me about tech, I'm an engineer, but I'm working in IT for my career, right? Originally a mechanical engineer. What's interesting to me about tech is how it changes. What changes with each generation of technology? So I could have been talking about blockchain, or I could have been talking about, it doesn't really matter, right? What's hard about imagining what tech can do is when it shifts the landscape for us. And ChatGPT, perfect example. It's not like conventional tech. It's not saying, oh, I could have done it this way. It's doing something totally different. And that's really hard for us to get our head around what's different here. So there's loads and loads of talk about ChatGPT in education. Great links. I love this guy here. Look at Word. This guy here, an American English teacher, if you want to see how good ChatGPT is at, he sets it 5 different English assignments. He produces wonderful Shakespearean sonnets. He produces a sequel to Death of the Salesman. All ask ChatGPT, give me a sequel to Death of the Salesman. Absolutely wonderful. And you see just the art of, you go, that's not like tech as I'm thinking tech, that's just transformational. But equally, you go, how am I going to use any of those things into something useful that I do? And that's the art to imagining how tech can be. Here's the imperfect ChatGPT asking about version 1 questions, our organization, right? Who are version 1? Great. Produces wonderful English language, really readable, really good, except it's got this interesting hallucination. Version 1 has offices in the UK, Ireland, and the Netherlands. Okay. I didn't know that. What partnerships have we got? Okay. Google Cloud, well, actually through an acquisition with a bit, but that's invented. Salesforce and SAP, absolutely not. And we work with loads of industry-leading partners, such as the people downstairs, I noticed today, Accenture, Deloitte, and KPMG. And if you imagine, how did it come up with these? Because actually, if you put all these other words together, this naturally, and you search the world's text, naturally you get to the next and the next and the next word, and it's kind of doing that, and it's coming up with something that's very plausible. It's just wrong. Here's my team. You can contact, how do I contact version 1 advisory services? You can contact them directly by emailing. That's not an email address to be had. Or calling. And that's the number of a jeweller's in Dublin. That one, don't know. Okay. So, pretty flawed. But you suddenly go, oh, how can I use that? Can I use it in any useful way? Well, actually, people are using it to generate assignments. People are using it, obviously, lots of students are using it to respond to assignments, okay, which might be missing the whole point of education. It makes writing certain types of content mechanical. That's good, but it might be mechanical rubbish, as is the case that's in there. It might produce a really intelligent search. It might produce a really stupid search, right? But it is really interesting in what it is producing, and some of it is really good if you can take the human into it and interpret what's produced and throw away the rubbish. So it produces really well-written content. But equally, it can be quite mindless content and plagiarism, and obviously it's a big threat. But it will be quite important. So you could produce lots of assignments, unique assignments with little tweaks, and you could give it to different people and let them respond. But actually it forces us to think in a different way. Well, actually, assuming this is not going away and it's going to get better and it's going to become even harder to detect its use, just assume that's the case. The question is, well, if that's going to be part of people's future working lives, they are going to be using tools like this, right? How do I actually bring that to be part of the education process? How do I actually change the way I do assessment? How do I let them use this as a labor-saving tool? And at the same time, how do I address these challenges? What's funny about it is, this is more like, as you've seen, it produces some rubbish, hallucinations, whatever. It's more like an analog technology than a digital technology, even though it's obviously clearly digital. And so we have to imagine the world where we deal with things that aren't exactitudes. We have to imagine a world that are analog, that, yeah, it's fairly accurate, it's fairly useful. How do I learn to do that? That's the art of actually trying to begin to integrate this into processes. That's where you have to actually go, yeah, you can't ignore it. It's going to be part of the world, but how do I use that effectively? How do I get my students to use it effectively? How do I get them to actually think and avoid missing the point of education while still expecting? And they are going to be using this stuff, right? That's the challenge that's out there. You could have talked about blockchain, and you go, blockchain. The challenge of blockchain is, how does trust connect to the real world? It's not on the whole, it's pretty secure. The leaks and hacks are at the edges of it. It's not in the core of it. But actually, there's usually people trying to disrupt, who are the advocates of it. They're trying to disrupt the centers of authority, the control structures that exist. That's the challenge, to say, well, does it make sense in my problem? So it could be academic records being used, tracked in blockchain. Well, we have things called databases. They're really good. We don't need delegation of who manages that. We have central authorities. We have JISC or EduCampus. We have the government. We don't need. And so sometimes when people push technologies, they fail to ask what is fundamentally different. What is the transformation that goes with this? And only if you get that right, then you can say, I understand what this is about. That might be really good in this problem. It's going to cause, it's rubbish over there. It won't do it. This person is promoting this technology, but really they don't understand what they're doing, or they're projecting a different agenda, and the tech bros are pretending it's about the tech when it's actually about some disruption. But you need to understand the disruptions. That's the art to understanding the art, the power, the usefulness of digital. One last piece. Ferris has a bunch of strategic goals. Great. The question that I take as you come back here really comes to this in relation to meeting this further education, higher education, research, all of that. Can we use this digital stuff to enrich, to catch the student, to support them, to inspire them, to lead them? I guess the thing for me is, as we imagine that future, that digital future, the wording I would use is getting out of the way. We've got to imagine what's the outcome we're trying to achieve for the student, right? And sometimes the art of the potential of the technology is to allow us to get out of the way, to imagine a different way that the outcome can be delivered for the student, for the economy, for the country, for industry, for whatever, right? It isn't about the institution. The thinking starts with the outcome that we're trying to deliver. Get out of the way. Imagine, what does the technology do to allow me to get out of the way? And then imagine, what's my responsibilities and process to enable, to deliver, to achieve that, and put yourself back into the picture. But the first question is, does the technology allow me to break down that physical wall? does it allow me to deliver the outcome for the student while hitting all of the diversity, hitting all of the equity, the effectiveness and efficiency? I guess that's the key art, getting this right, is get out of the way and use the technology.
Jason is going to share with us his experience on JISC, the JISC journey, and how they support their members on their digital journey. So very, very excited to have Jason here with us today. He came from another conference yesterday, so in hot demand. So thank you, Jason, and please come to the podium.
Thank you very much. And, well, good afternoon we're on. And digital transformation is something very close to my heart. And I'm going to start with an example very close to me indeed, and that is transformation of microphones. I find it interesting, and I think a key part about digital transformation and imagining where we might go is about re-examining design of where we're at. Now, the microphone and microphones serve a pretty clear purpose. That's all straightforward. Now, Ronan, before me, is 6'6" and I'm 5'2". But yeah, this points in one direction, so there we go. Now, there's nothing about this design of this microphone that suggests that it's user adjustable, but I'm going to take a risk. And there we go in terms of this. But wouldn't it be great if we just had actually a microphone here that managed to cover the whole stage back to here, because there's going to be basically one person in front of a lectern in speaking, and so that purpose is clear. And so maybe this microphone needs to change in future. And we're talking about quite a lot here about infrastructure and how that meets our needs as well. And one of the ones I'm fascinated by is if you look around this room, it's very pleasant surroundings and the building's very impressive. And there's one thing as a presenter, a key thing here that's missing that's about €3 worth, a clock. There is no clock here. And the number of times I present and look to the back of the room and find no clock. Now, we could talk about a vision for the future whereby my Outlook calendar manages to interface with some other system and it knows what time I've got and tells me, Jason, you should be on slide 10 now. But we haven't quite got there. But I think about what we're talking about in transformation, and again, building on the previous presentations, is about rethinking that in terms of higher education. And there may be things around that. So I'm here to talk about experience and vision, certainly. And I thought that I could have been about framework and toolkit, but I thought experience and vision sounded more interesting, to be honest. And I'll be clear as to this. You've all been to presentations, I'm pretty sure, whereby the speaker is on slide 4 after 25 minutes and a half-hour presentation with 37 slides showing at the bottom. I will warn you, my presentation's slightly like that because some of the later ones are for reference. And are we sending the slides on to delegates? So I can make them available through Slido or whatever as well. So some of them there. It was mentioned about my Wi-Fi enabled sporran. This is the way forward, ladies and gentlemen. Disappointingly, it is not yet EduRoam enabled because for power dissipation reasons and security reasons primarily. But in the future, we will have this. And of course, all 3 tassels are antennae. But, yeah. Can I ask, I'm going to have a bit of engagement here as well. So first of all, could you all raise your hands, please? Right, that's just getting you to move and raise your hands to prove you can all do it, because I know there's always a reluctance to engage here. Could I ask the question as to how many of you are currently undertaking higher education courses? Okay, a smattering through the room, and that's great. Now, you're professionals here, and that's a fairly typical sample there. I would say it's less than 10% of today's audience. And I think one of the great questions about how we can reimagine higher education is about widening the reach of higher education. And one of the things I come back to is often we talk about engagement with students, working with students, co-design with students. Actually, I'm very interested in how we consult with non-students, those who are currently excluded from the model of delivery of higher education. And who can get the benefits beyond those that are there now. I'm Director, Scotland and Northern Ireland. JISC, if you haven't come across us, is effectively the equivalent of HEAnet in the United Kingdom. In Scotland, we have got 19 higher education institutions, the biggest being Edinburgh with its over £1 billion turnover, quite an organisation. The smallest is part of UHI, Highland Theological College. It's 3 guys and a dog, and between you and I'm not unconvinced 2 of the guys aren't the same person with a different hat on each day, but that's where we're at. And my job is to ensure that whilst JISC benefits from being a UK-wide organisation in economies of scale, that we deliver appropriately for the Scottish national agenda and the Northern Irish agenda. And also, I get to be the voice of Scotland and Northern Ireland within JISC and remind some of my English colleagues that not everything is Anglo-centric. So in this area, we support higher education, and we do support further education as well, but in higher education, we are looking to be the trusted partner in digital transformation and building on our core strengths in what we do. Because we heard from our members, and we're owned by the sector, that they need help in scaffolding, finding the way forward in terms of transformation. So we're doing that by focusing on 3 things there. First of all, undertaking research into key challenge areas. Undertaking it ourselves, but also tapping into the great research that's being done within the sector. And if any of you know anything about the sector, and I was just discussing this before I came in here, about getting the sector to share its own knowledge between itself is a challenge. And I've made a career about going to very bright people, listening to what they say, and then repeating it somewhere else. So that's, and it's that sharing that they just cease to do. Engaging in co-designing with our communities, though I do wish my graphics people would put a hyphen in co-designing so it doesn't look like code signing, because every time I see it, it looks like code signing. But engaging in co-designing with our communities to make sure that we deliver for their needs. And we provide evidence-informed advice and guidance. As has come out already, we're at a key point in where higher education can go and what the university can look like. And it draws upon a tradition. And on the good side of that, higher education has been around and successful in the United Kingdom and in Ireland for a very long time. And I always like the fact that University of St Andrews, University of St Andrews or St Andrews University, it doesn't have an apostrophe in it. And the reason is because St Andrews University is so old, it predates the use of the apostrophe commonly in the English language. Now, that's quite something. And of course, we have a draw, and some institutions have the draw of the history that surrounds them, and higher education in the UK and in Ireland certainly draws upon that. But sometimes the downside of that is the difficulty in moving forward and trying to achieve small changes even within the model in which higher education is presented. And actually, I'll take an example from a college in Scotland. I visited a shiny new building that was there, and it was great. It was lots of glass, lots of shiny concrete and primary colours, and it felt good. And as I toured the building and showing the classrooms, I couldn't help but notice there were an awful lot of boxes. Boxes with 25 seats or so, all facing the front, with a smart board, an interactive smart board, remember those, at the front. And I asked the question, when the building was being designed, had they given any thought to different ways in which the curriculum could be delivered? And this building cost many millions, and the answer was that they had an ageing workforce in terms of population of lecturers there, and they didn't think they could move the lecturing body to a different way of working. So the students, the learners, were going to be subjected to that infrastructure for a long time. It's a nice building, it should last a long time. But still, that architecture will hold it back. And I think the question, if you take anything away today, is whatever your role in your institution, is to go away and think about the things that are the informational architecture, the system architecture, that's a bit like those rooms and the constraints, and whether we can think about doing something entirely different. So this is a fantastic date to have chosen to have your conference, because, well, currently in Birmingham, our JISC conference is taking place, DigiFest. And this very morning, we launched our digital transformation framework. And if you Google JISC, Digital Transformation Framework, you'll find that published at 8 o'clock this morning. And I'm the first person to present it. You're the first person to hear it, because the person who actually led the project is presenting at 3 o'clock this afternoon. So we're 3 hours ahead of the game, which I think is fantastic. So if you Google it, I'll find it. There are other search engines available other than Google. If you want to know them, just Google them. So we have gone through a process of, just before the pandemic, in fact, we started to look at learning and teaching reimagined. Like, how can we do this differently? And look at our own HE strategy as to how we support universities as well. And these were the 3 key themes that came out of it. The first, importantly, I think, is the empowering culture and leadership part of it. How are we actually going to do something different? That can be pretty difficult to get around. One of our keynote speakers at our conference yesterday, Irma Martinez, once worked as a head of internet for a consultancy. And she was invited in to talk to the leaders, the CEOs of the UK banking industry about this thing called the internet and what it might lead to. And she was presenting on online banking. And one of the CEOs said, that's all nonsense. Our customers love our branches. That turned out to be true because their branches are now all bar ones after they all closed down and were taken over by a private equity firm. And so, yeah, a good glass of Shiraz now can be gotten from those branches as well. But it shows sometimes the anchor, the resistance to reimagining that's there. And again, there's a question as to whether higher education needs that sort of transformation. Can I ask, and again, hands up time again, how many of you use LinkedIn Learning? That's, maybe 3 or 4 times more than the number doing higher education courses. Well, there's a way of going forward. And there's a question as to higher education. Is it for 18-year-olds doing a 3 or 4 year degree, depending on where you are in the United Kingdom or Ireland? And is that the model we're looking at? Because we all probably are aware of the social aspects of that time of life and what it can mean. Or do we want it to be something that enables the lifelong learning journey as well and have a constant evolvement of it? I'll be quite interested, and I don't know if any universities here have this model, but I'll be interested in the day that just like my music from Spotify, just like my video from Netflix and Amazon Prime, and just like my employer pays for LinkedIn Learning, will I ever be able to subscribe to an educational institution on a personal basis? Would you be able to give me the value that would mean that I'll give up however many euros a month in order to take up that offer as a different way of engaging with education? But that culture and leadership has to happen there. Moving on to reimagining learning, teaching and assessment. And we have this core model of the undergraduate degree, then postgraduate study perhaps. And we have the challenge of breaking out of that perhaps. So we have the strengths in the degree being the core unit of it being substantial, coherent, that social learning piece that I've mentioned. But it's also big and slow to change. And mentioned about validation events. My goodness, I was a lecturer and head of law for 10 years and trying to revalidate courses and move things on. Now, well, I have to say there are areas now of skills needs, especially in technology and digital, where trying to move things along sufficiently to keep them up to date is a real challenge. We have many aspects, I think, of higher education that suit full-time learning. Even the term full-time is there. And the number of people now who are able to drop the rest of their lives and dedicate themselves to being attached to an institution, and again with the model of perhaps living in that life for 3 or 4 years. And well, that's becoming more pressingly difficult, and certainly the cost of living pressures in the United Kingdom are making it very hard for students and indeed everywhere this is happening. We also have a lot of higher education delivered by researchers who teach. And that isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's something that has to be addressed. And that's, as we know, an academic career often involves a path towards research. And we know that there are ways in which that's been addressed, but the core model involves researchers who teach. And the flexibility side of it's very interesting as well. So on behalf of the Scottish Funding Council, we helped them with a consultation on a national standard for online learning. And one of the interesting things that kept on coming back from the student body, and indeed the not student body, those who weren't able to engage with the current models, was the lack of flexibility. What happens when a learner misses 4 weeks because they're ill or something else happens in their life? Are they put in a position where they're getting, after 4 weeks, to be in a position where they're going to have to wait till next year to take up the course again? Is that the way in which we want to deliver? It could be 6 weeks, it could be 2 months. How do we sort that? And again, the flexibility of approaches to the outcome as well. So I remember, and this is a long time ago, 25 years ago, our PVC, where I worked for teaching and learning, gave a wonderful speech about how things were changing, flexibility was coming in, that no longer did we see the inexorable path towards doing the degree as being the be-all and end-all. There's a reason why there were exit awards, a certificate of higher education, diploma in higher education, and we should recognise that they are not failures. And then from his office, about 2 weeks later, I got a request for a report as to my failure rates that says people failing to progress to the next year. And I thought, well, okay, there's a mismatch there of expectations. So how do we allow people to come in and out of higher education, perhaps, in a more agile way? And that involves reimagining learning, teaching, and assessment. And again, the point was made, I love the debate around ChatGPT and assessment, and it's forced people to think about that situation whereby we did ask students to go into dusty halls and to write what they knew on a particular subject, having learned it somewhere. And by learn, we mean remember it pretty much. And with some part about having to do something with it in their minds, hopefully. But ChatGPT certainly puts some pressure on the coursework side and to look at authentic assessment and such, and how we tackle that. In the end of the day, of course, ChatGPT produces uncited stuff, and again, as an exercise, and through the discussions, we know that this is the case, but academia does recognise that the student's ability to recognise the accuracy as to whether you have a version 1 office in Netherlands or whatever is there. But one thing is for sure, ChatGPT is not going away, and it's going to be better tomorrow, and it's going to be a lot better in a year's time, and who knows where it goes from there. And so how are we preparing the learners? Reframing the student experience as well is there, and I'm going to talk about some of these things a little bit later on. I mentioned about flexibility already, the need for relevancy. I've got a friend who studied, again, a few years ago, but I think this sometimes this attitude is there. It was an English university, and he was studying computer science. And this computing faculty had actually created their own programming language, completely separate to anything that exists in the real world, to save the students being sullied by anything so dirty as practical knowledge. They were teaching computer science and the abstract and the principles thereof. Now, I can get that. I'm a big fan of philosophy, and one might call some things that I've done in terms of law applied philosophy. But still, the idea of designing a course around de-skilling the students from contemporary things that they might use seems mad, but it happened, and we have to make sure that the student's experience involves relevancy. So what have we been up to then in JISC? There was a report, Digital Strategies in UK Higher Education, Making Digital Mainstream. And again, I think we were there looking at reviewing the digital strategies that were in place of universities across the UK, drawing out the common themes from them as well. And it's worthwhile looking at. And I'm going to finish off at the end by coming back to the 6 key themes that came out of that. We, from that, developed a framework for digital transformation. It was ready for launch today at DigiFest 23, but of course it's now being launched at EduCampus's annual seminar. It got there first. Benchmarking digital transformation, delivering a maturity model for higher education. Because what we found is that it's all very well to talk to senior leadership teams about digital transformation, what it means, where to go. But the ask back of us has been for some sort of framework, some sort of structure to move things forward, because it's difficult to talk about it in the abstract, just in the same way that very bright and able chief executive officer of a bank, when dealing with thinking about online banking, said something that today, these years later, seems very silly, benefit of hindsight and all of that. But then again, what are the things that we are being invited to say or accept today that will seem silly in 10, 20 years' time? And maybe there are some things we can make sound silly in 5 years' time. Or maybe that student who started today their studies of higher education could benefit from a rethink for next year and how we can increase the pace of things. And mentioned beforehand, amazing what happened in terms of the adoption of video conferencing and the change of use of physical space and the remote access to higher education as a result of the pandemic. And recently in Wales, the minister said that, well, they're sort of rethinking their digital 2030 strategy because as a result of COVID, it sort of happened by about 2025 now. And that's bad news to me because I've been inciting the Scottish Government and Funding Council to adopt Digital 2029 just to beat the Welsh. But I'm now going to have to persuade them to do 2024, so they're going to have to get a move on with that. But the reason why we did that framework is to give tools, a toolkit to take forward that thinking about what needs to change and why. Can we do something radically different? So we're developing a maturity model for higher education from now through to July, so that institutions can evaluate where they're going and look at that and encourage those conversations, and then moving on to the things that will demonstrate digital transformation, a series of events and from May onwards indeed. And hopefully that's something we can bring to Ireland as well, and not stepping on toes, but working together on that, because I think there's a lot to be learned between the two. I had to throw in my definition of digital transformation. I think no presentation can be without a definition. But this one here is from EduCampus, and it struck me, and I'll leave you to read that a second. And for me, the key words are in culture. That's that shifting of that, doing that differently. And about the business model and strategic directions and value proposition. Again, following on from what's been said, not about the technical or the digital necessarily, but about if I go to university tomorrow, what's the different experience I get? How is it better? How can we have more people at university, perhaps, given the resources that we have? How do we address what we do in those interesting questions? And I love the transformations that happen. One of my favourites is I used to study and look at law as a system and look at total quality management as part of that. And it's a long apocryphal story that's from long ago. And it's of an American company that got components from Japan, and they specified a tolerance of 3 failures per 1,000 components that they were getting in. And they got their package from Japan, and it was the 1,000 components, and there was a little packet with 3 in it with a note saying, "Here are your failures. We don't understand why you want them." And it was a different way of thinking about quality in terms of that. And so I do wonder about what the shifts are. And again, we're looking and working with the sector to work out what those paradigm shifts are. And one thing I'm going to do in a little bit is get you to think about, for a second, about within your lives, what are the things we've come to accept that aren't really acceptable? And there's a whole bunch of things. I won't say anything about these doors because they're right, but now I point this out, will probably annoy you too, but the number of times I come across doors with a handle that you have to push. Why? Why do we have that? And there is no good reason. That's other than to make people look stupid when you try and pull them. But yeah. So digital transformation then, as a result of a framework we've recognised this is about people, core business activities, technical infrastructure, the 3 focuses here and how they're addressed. And people is key, of course, to this. I always remember back, I've been around long enough since the introduction of what were then metropolitan area networks and access to the internet, basically stepping up a notch in terms of universities. And I remember being in a presentation about our metropolitan area network, and this was in Fife and Tayside. We had the unfortunate acronym FATMAN. Yes, technology and acronyms. But the presentation was around the fact that we could now transfer between 4 local institutions 1,000 Encyclopedia Britannicas a second. And there was a rather elderly professor, but still in the university, still doing stuff. And I could see him at the back, slowly putting his hand up. And he was asked, yes, so you've got a question. He said, yeah, why would we want to transfer Encyclopedia Britannicas between the institutions? And what hadn't happened is opening up the question as to, well, what are the possibilities and what we can do with that capability, and taking people with you is the key to this. When I go for another job interview at some point in my life, I will certainly be asking about what support am I going to be given? What budget do I have for kits at the very basic level in order to take me forward? And on my first day as a law lecturer, I remember I had photocopied a research article and went back to my desk and thought, oh, actually, I want to staple this together. Went along to the school office and said, could I have a stapler? And they said, no, your department's had too many staplers. So I thought, about 70% of the institutions, not more actually at that point, spending was salaries, and yet they were going to thwart my daily job by not giving me a stapler, which then cost about 50 pence. And another university I know of hailed itself as a digital university. It diverted a lot of funds to supporting students with digital and what it might mean. And at that point, that involved CD-ROM resources. I'm showing my age. But they failed to give any of the staff CD-ROM drives. So the lecturers were being asked to support students, but without being able to get access to the resources that the students were actually using. And so people need to be taken forward, and that's partly about the technical infrastructure. Okay, that's where we're at with that. Now, this is a diagram. Now, unfortunately, this is, because it's just been released today, I got some nice graphics sent to me first thing this morning to put into this, which was a bit late. And actually, in terms of changing ways of thinking, and I know my colleagues back at GIST will have this, but I thought it was interesting when I got one of the report through today. You'll see that and if you look up the report that's been released, it's released as a PDF, as you would expect. It happens quite often. Thankfully, it's got good accessibility practice in terms of flows and things, so you can cut and paste out of it. But I noticed that they've done a few of these graphics, including this one, across 2 pages, which doesn't work when you're looking at on a device. And so the graphics are a bit split up there. But this is how we see ourselves helping the HE sector. So you won't be able to see the wording from there, probably, and certainly not at the back. So and you're not, it's not crucial. But around the different areas of digital and physical infrastructure. And again, I'll invite you to go off and have a look at the framework and look at it out, and especially with toolkits. Now, I don't know about you. You look all like fairly practical people. When it comes to a toolkit, then actually having a half-hour presentation on things you can do with a hammer, not really very great. That's a give me half an hour in the garage with a hammer and hitting things to find out what it can do so much better. And so I'll invite you as well to look at the toolkit elements of the framework and work out how they might apply to your organisation, what you can do to take it forward. So digital transformation process then. So these are the sort of steps we're looking at. And for me, a key part of that is aspiration, reimagining the strategy of the organisation and what we can do. And we offer to our members a workshop called the Vision for Change workshop. And this is senior leaders, that's an institution. And the first thing they have to do is draw the future. No words allowed. You have to draw pictures. You cannot believe the look of horror on the faces of senior management being asked to draw a picture. And the reason that we do that is to force them out of easy ways of thinking. Now, I've been around just for quite a long. I'm as good as the next one at writing business-style reports. Like, I can put the big words in. I can do the big sentences. And we're all kind of used to that in many ways, evaluation reports and all the rest of it. But being forced out of comfort zone by actually being forced to draw something, I think is quite interesting. And I wonder what that, again, going back to that chief executive officer of the bank, thinking about online banking, what they might have they put down on pen and paper as a drawing if they were asked to imagine the future. Well, maybe it would have just been as a branch of the bank, but maybe they should have been thinking a little bit further forward. So the framework takes people through the leadership part, and I think the leadership is quite key here. Through the pandemic, I did come across one institution that failed to have a senior leadership meeting for 7 weeks at the start of the pandemic because it couldn't get its stuff together in order to hold that. And another moment of clarity from a university vice-chancellor, in fact, that recognised that whilst he loved to get his team into one place and thrash out the issues, then this wasn't something that was open to everyone within the institution, and because of remote working, because of people working part-time, for example. And so recognised the need in order to engage with collaborative, consultative working, that they used inclusivity with the remote as well, and a more flexible approach, basically, and to use the digital tools himself. And indeed, that sort of leadership, setting the example, I think needs to be quite key. And I'm always quite interested in readiness, that aspect of it. And that involves obviously systems, appraisals, working out what needs to underlie the capability, and of course, people's readiness to change. Because what we know is that, and you probably have seen this, that I get to visit many colleges and universities across Scotland and Northern Ireland quite often, and I arrive and I'm shown the great things that are being done. And we all sort of know that quite a lot of these are pockets of excellence. Achieving a change in the baseline is much more difficult. And I've given an example from my own experience. My stepdaughter studied at a Scottish university, and talking to their leadership, I was told about how the wonderful things this institution did around encouraging students to work on their digital presence, their social media engagement, their community engagement through this. And especially my stepdaughter was going to work into an area of arts where the personality is everything, you might say, and very important, getting that reputation. And then, of course, I came home and I asked my stepdaughter, so having done your course then, and she had just finished, saying, what guidance did you get on building your online persona and your professional presence? And she told me that there was only one thing: they were told not to slag the university off on social media. And I think that we do know as well that at our best, and at the sector's best, there are marvellous things that go on. But the big challenge is making sure that every learner benefits from all of those, and making sure then the readiness leads to implementation and review in a meaningful way. Admittedly, part of that is getting the core systems right, and hence the value of EduCampus's work. There's nothing like a good arrow and journey, and we have this here. So the framework's designed to move on with maturity, to be able to evaluate, to move on to checklists, to look at that process and to give some sort of certainty as to where we're at. There's templates in order for use, and then recycling the examples back into the sector so that we share the experience that goes on. This slide wasn't designed by me. I have no idea in this day and age why we still have slides with whole lots of text on them, but I'll live with it because it's lots of notes for me. I'm not going to go through it in depth, you'll be glad to hear, but the foundation systems need to be there quite clearly. I'm always interested in the fact that the academic life revolves around the hour block, driven by timetabling, pretty much in practicality, for example. And so we need the foundation systems that allow the agility to move forward. And the willingness to address challenges where we go. Part of that is a thing called Digital Experience Insights, and I'm not sure if there's an equivalent here, but JISC offers the service to colleges and universities, and it's a structured survey, and it's available in various versions for students, teaching staff, professional support staff, and it allows a survey to gauge the perceptions of how things are working. And this has proved to be a very valuable tool because at the end of it, institutions get benchmark against the rest of the sector, equivalent organisations as to where they stand. And so I liked one of the Scottish institutions which was about to chuck quite a lot of money solving what it perceived as a problem in its virtual learning environment and the way students were engaging with it. And actually the institutions get real-time access to the survey results coming back. And they saw that from that information that what they were about to tackle wasn't actually the problem. So it wasn't around the design of VLE, it was more about the content that was being used within it. So they could divert that away. And so in terms of benchmarking the satisfaction, the experience of staff and students, then Digital Experience Insights is one of our key tools. and those organisational attributes as well that are key as well in the digital culture. A robust review process, working with sector bodies, community experts, and ourselves looking at where we're going with this and what is to be achieved. At the end of it, what do we want out of this? If I send my son or daughter off to a university or perhaps some sort of other higher education provider, then I want them to get the best experience. That's where we're going. And indeed, we have moved away in some of our areas, away from the word transformation for the reasons I think you gave there, Ronan. And we now call it, well, either elevation, because transformation only has an implicit notion of improvement. I could transform my house by bulldozing it. That's it may not necessarily be an improvement. So use elevation or enhancement and working out where that could go. And so I think that language is difficult. Now, I've come to the end of my time, so I will ask you, when you get a moment to reflect on what are the things that we're accepting now that could be different in terms of that, in terms of systems working together and how we can, as shared services as well, address that on behalf of all. We still have the situation across the UK and even in Scotland, which is the most collaborative of the UK nations, where institutions aren't gaining the most out of working together. So we know of plenty of examples where there are pockets of things happening that would be best done on the whole, and again, hence the value of NRENs such as HENet and EduCampus in terms of the provision of services. I promised some reference slides at the end, a review of learning curriculum design. If you're interested in that, you'll hopefully get this presentation with those links. Modes of participation in learning I find fascinating as well. Again, perhaps looking at that challenge of the expectation of full-time learning towards a degree rather than a more granular engagement being promoted, and how we work forward with that. Rethinking assessment and feedback again. And whilst I did quite well as being someone who could memorise quite a lot of stuff and then regurgitate it next morning in an exam hall, then whether that prepared me for my future life, I'm quite clear that's not the case. And we have some particular thoughts about international students as well and their digital experience. We have to remember the most international students are coming by a greater choice. It's not just a standard thing to go from a Scottish school and either go to college or university. Then they're looking at a worldwide market. They're paying quite a lot of money to do this as well. And so the digital experience of students, especially since part of it might be remote because they're going to go home at some point and work between places, is quite key on this. So something we've been particularly working on. With that, I will say, I said I would finish with 6 things that came out of the report that Nick Skelton did for us back in January, and that report's digital strategies in UK higher education, making digital mainstream. So the first was investment in infrastructure and systems. Good place to say that, huh? That's, yeah, if we can get that all right and we can streamline it, then all to the better. And I coming across so many examples still of rekeying information. And also one thing I think that would move forward, and we speak about data quite a lot, is I think we need to move on from data to insight. It's all very well chucking a load of data at me, but what I do with it as a human is difficult. Give me an insight instead. And so I like the system we do employ as an employer, just does employee surveys. And we use a particular system that all the data's there. It can give me the percentages of how many said what, but it uses background knowledge and AI to work out what 3 things from that organisation's experience we should concentrate on. And being told what 3 things matter is an awful lot better than telling me that 85% of staff are happy to stay at JISC for another year. So I want to be told that. When it comes down to learning analytics, as a lecturer, I want to be told, here are 3 students that you should engage with, 1 by email, 2 by a phone call. That is great insight into me, and because they're at risk of dropping out. Giving me a whole lot of figures isn't going to do it. So moving on in terms of insight, I think is quite key. Lightweight processes to manage investment and change. How many of you had projects that have been multi-year as you've worked your way through university committees? I think we've all been there. So how can we do it faster and make that change? As was mentioned, using cyber as a positive to get things changed. And COVID, again, as a driver, has shown the ability to do this. Focus on people and skills, and I've said strong engagement and customer focus, working together, and especially student engagement. And my challenge is, well, non-student engagement to ask those who are not part of the model already. The fifth one, digitally aware strategic leadership, as I mentioned, and 6, evidence-based digital research, which we already have happening in pockets around the sector. Indeed, many universities conduct some fantastic educational research themselves. But how do we bring that together? Happy to continue the conversation. If you want to link up with Scotland and Northern Ireland, then I'm your person. And with just greater 1,200 of us, so quite a big organisation. We've merged recently with a number of other organisations, though we seem to have emerged with the colour orange being a predominant colour and the name JISC being the name. So yes, but we all work together within that. Thank you very much.
We might have a few questions for Jason. Okay. Perfect. But if you want to just,
I thought I was getting away.
Hi, Jason.
Yes.
Just say, firstly, thanks very much for the presentation, fantastic, and just to extend the same congratulations to everyone else today, really informative, and lots of food for thought certainly going forward. Just in relation to your own presentation, you referenced a number of times throughout it the need for benchmarking, particularly in terms of the framework that you've newly developed. Our experience is that benchmarking can be quite difficult, particularly around SaaS products when there's no data around user cases beforehand to benchmark from. I'm just wondering, is this a challenge you would have faced in this process? And even in terms of that, what would you benchmark against?
Very much. So there's 2 levels, I think, of comparison that can be made. First is the technical one, and depending on the system, depending on that, and we sometimes use imprecise or make-do compromise benchmarks. We all know that we love the world of how many page views have there been on the internet for something, and yet we all know that that's probably not a great measure of impact, but still we can measure it. So there are technical ones as well. But I think actually more important is I'll go back to what I mentioned about digital experience insights, because whatever the system is doing, then we need to know how users are perceiving it. And if you can, we encourage our members to use digital experience insights every year, and so they can track that. And there's the ability as well for members to individually add some of the specific questions. So with regards to specific products and services and projects, where things are going. So they have a before and after as to the user experience in the area, which I think is the key thing in the end. Now, one could argue still that it might be that it doesn't, whatever the system is, the change that's been made still doesn't fulfill its promise, but people are feeling nicer about it. And sometimes that can show. But on the whole, if users feel that they're empowered and their perception is that life is better, then it probably is.
That's great, thank you.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much, Jason. Thank you. Okay, so we have our final speaker of the day today. Gavin Barber is Deputy Director of Academic Affairs and Student Administration at Oxford Brookes. And as many of you may know, Oxford Brookes is actually undergoing a significant digital transformation project with the implementation of a new student system. And Gavin is going to take us through his learnings from that in terms of culture, people, processes, and communication. So we look forward to your insights, and welcome to the stage, Gavin.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Emma, for the introduction. Thank you for inviting me to speak. It's lovely to be in the beautiful city of Dublin. Speaking personally, it's lovely to be back in the EU, if only for a short time. I miss it. I really, really do. I must follow up Jason's clock observation with a brief anecdote about timekeeping from recent memory. A big news story in the UK from last year was that the Queen died. It may have made the papers over here, I'm not sure. And none of us, of course, have any experience of working in a public institution when the monarch has died. It hadn't happened in any of our working lives. be better prepared when it happens again in a couple of years. There was a certain amount of panic, but much to my surprise, there was actually a plan. Someone had written up that this is the plan for a public institution, Oxford Brookes, responding to the death of a monarch. Even more to my surprise, it actually existed digitally. It wasn't a piece of paper and on someone's shelf. Nonetheless, plans can't cover every eventuality. And that particular week at Oxford Brookes, we were holding our graduation ceremonies, which was only the second graduation ceremonies we'd had in person since the pandemic, so it was kind of a big deal. So instantly there was a lot of, okay, what do we do now? What is the right thing to do in this kind of big, ritualistic, but still hopefully enjoyable ceremony at a time that is officially of national mourning? First question: are we going to cancel tomorrow's ceremonies? No, of course we're not going to. People have come from all over the world for this. That's not what we're going to do. How should we observe it? We came up with a new definition of a nanosecond, which was the gap between someone suggesting that we should play the national anthem and me and my boss saying, no, we're not in unison. But it was agreed that we would have a minute's silence at the start of the ceremony. And practically, that's perhaps more challenging than you might think, because the particular role that, for one ceremony, my boss and then me had to play was, as it worked out, was to time this minute's silence. The senior manager presiding over the ceremony would sort of announce it, and it was down to us to let them know when a minute was up. But like a lot of people, both my boss and I have got these fitness watches or smartwatches which don't stay illuminated. So John, my boss, did the first ceremony. He said, yeah, well, what I did was I got into the settings of my watch and then found the bit where you can keep the screen on for 60 seconds. And I was like, okay, that's really good. I've never played with the settings on this watch. So, just before going into this ceremony where I was carrying the mace and all this sort of thing, I found the setting that kept the screen visible for 60 seconds. And then I was thinking, okay, so how am I gonna stand holding a mace, looking like I'm really sad about the death of the Queen, whilst also kind of surreptitiously looking at my watch? I wasn't quite sure how stupid I was going to look. Anyway, the minute I took to the bit of the stage where I was standing, looked over to the wall over there, what was on the wall? A clock, an analog clock, which made the task a great deal easier, which kind of supports your point, Jason. So a little bit of context about Oxford Brookes before I introduce myself. There's another university in Oxford, which you may have heard of. It's been mentioned a couple of times this morning. We're nothing to do with them. We're not connected with them. We're a totally separate institution. The name doesn't do us any harm in the international recruitment market. We have 18,000 students and about 3,000 staff. We have three main campuses in the city of Oxford. Over the next few years, that will become one campus. That's another transformation journey. We also have a campus in a town called Swindon, which is about 20 miles down the road, less famous, but a really important part of our mission as an institution, a town of quite high unemployment. So, as I say, very, very important that we have a presence there and help support that community. In the kind of taxonomy of UK higher education, we're what's known as a post-92 university. Higher Education Act of that year meant that everything that all institutions which had previously been polytechnics became universities. Well, our actual origins date back to 1865 when we were founded as a School of Art, later a School of Technology, then a polytechnic, and then from 1992 a university. So we've been a university since 1992. We've existed since 1865. In 2015, we made for the first time a list of the top 50 universities under the age of 50 globally, which we made quite a big deal about. In the same year as we were celebrating our 150th anniversary, which we also made quite a big deal about. Somehow managed to do that with a straight face. That's the context of where we are. My role is as Deputy Director of Academic and Student Administration. Basically, I'm in charge of the registry, student records, curriculum records, all the associated processes as listed there. Sponsor license compliance, that may not mean a huge amount to you. That's a UK government thing. It's hugely resource intensive for us to be a sponsor of international students on what are now called student route visas, timetabling and exams. So that's the scope of my role. I'm sort of familiar with technology, but I'm not a technical person. So my role in the implementation of a new student record system at Oxford Brookes was what would be called in program management terms, I guess, a senior user or key stakeholder. It was my team's lived experience which was being changed and hopefully transformed in positive ways. You would have hopefully picked up that the title of this presentation is taken from the song Changes by David Bowie. It's kind of an obvious reference point for a presentation about change. There's lyrics from the song scattered around the slides just to give a vaguely poetic feel. I realised that if any of you don't know the song, it's just going to look a bit weird, but hopefully not too distracting. I nearly chose a different song, but thought it probably wasn't accessible enough. But are any of you familiar with the work of the English band Half Man, Half Biscuit? Any recognition at all? One person, thank you. They're a fantastic band from the Wirral near Liverpool. Definitely the most important band ever to come out of Merseyside. Their songs have titles like yes, that's my. I'm having that played at my funeral. I am. And A Man of Constant Sorrow with a Garage in Constant Use, and kind of witty titles like that. One of their probably more accessible ones, and certainly one that they unfailingly play in live shows, is called That. It's a brilliant song. Look it up. The light at the end of the tunnel is the light of an oncoming train. And I nearly called my presentation that simply because for much of the transformation journey that we went on in implementing a new student record system, that is how it felt. That is absolutely how it felt. So what I really hope, A, is that some of you go and look up Half Man, Half Biscuit on Spotify, but more importantly, that the lessons we learned from that experience can help you on your transformation journeys avoid that feeling being prevalent amongst your teams and your colleagues. So that's the structure that I'm going to cover in the next half hour or so. The number 6 there, what we do differently, the lessons learned piece is actually scattered quite throughout the presentation. So the lessons learned is not restricted to that section. But yeah, the context about the transformation journey, what the challenges were, what worked well, what we do differently, and where we have ended up. So the context is that we had an in-house database and portal since 2004. I've actually misstated that slightly. The portal, the student and staff-facing portal, dated from 2004 and was very innovative. The database that sat behind it was actually first built in-house in 1994. The database was on an Oracle platform and was running out of support. So, you know, you can't get a more classic example of the burning platform for change. It was literally unsupported. All of our student data, a huge amount of financial data, was sitting in a system that could crash at any time and with no support. So that's kind of, you know, makes a convincing case for change. The IT department hated it. It was called EXIS, by the way. It's important to remember that, called EXIS, Electronic Course and Student Information System. The IT department absolutely hated it, but it was genuinely something that was loved by pretty much all of the users, and it was liked because it was really innovative for its time. I think we were one of the first, not only UK higher education institutions to build our own database and then later have a student-facing portal. As I say, we didn't have to ask anyone else to change it. We didn't have to go to Ellucian or Tribal or anybody else if we wanted to change it. And it was a source of pride. And because colleagues, particularly in back office roles like those in my team, had been using it since the 90s for the whole of their career at Oxford Brookes, it's kind of part of the fabric of their working lives. Those screens are what they think about when they think about going to work, and that's kind of reassuring and comforting and all of those things. IT didn't like it, as I say, because it was unsupported, and also, and I'm sure this is familiar, the number of undocumented processes and single points of failure were extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. And sorry if this next recollection is morbid, but there was one point towards the end of the time when we were using Exis when a routine relating to finance went down. It just stopped working. One of the checking routines just stopped working. And the sort of question went round, who built that? Who knows how that works? Who can fix it? Mike built it. Mike's just died. That literally happened. And literally a couple of days after he passed. And there was no, despite those tragic circumstances, Mike was a much loved, very experienced colleague, very fine trade unionist. But we knew he was ill. We knew he was ill and we knew he wasn't coming back. And yet still, he managed to leave this earthly realm without anybody picking up the information about how this particular business critical routine worked. So that was an example of why we needed to change. We did an initial make or buy evaluation. Should we rebuild our own system, or should we get something proprietary? Decided on the buy option. Can talk about how we reached that decision in over lunch if anyone's interested. So what was the project? What was the change project? Very simply, replace the student record system, replace the student portal, and give us for the first time an application portal. I'll probably come to this again, but and no doubt your institutions are better informed than some of my senior management colleagues at the time were. But the difficulty right from the start, right before we had any kind of project team in place, of explaining to colleagues that a new student record system is not something that you go down and get from a high street electrical retailer and plug in like you would like I don't know an air fryer or a gaming console or something like that. It was a real challenge right from the early days to say to people, getting something off the shelf is not as simple as you might think or assume that it's going to be. What was the timeline? These are quite approximate timelines. So 2015, we appointed a strategic partner, BA Consulting, if anyone's interested, and a program manager who was a full-time member of staff at Oxford Brookes to kick things off. 2016 was when we wrote the specification. We invited tenders and we chose the preferred supplier. During that process, and this kind of sowed the seeds of something I wish we'd done differently. Excuse me. The functional specification was very atomized, was very much broken down into work streams, into themes. What are the admissions requirements? What are the student record requirements? What are the data return requirements? And that was a necessary approach to get the right level of detail into the specification, but I really wish we'd joined things up more coherently at that point. I'll return to that theme later on. We invited the tenders, and having written the specifications in a huge amount of detail, the bids came back in a huge amount of detail. I have a memory of my old flat one Sunday afternoon, the living room literally being covered in bits of paper from different suppliers as I tried to go through a scoring process. The preferred supplier that we chose, as you will have picked up, was EduCampus for the Banner 9 student record system. So during 2017, as I say, these are approximate timelines. That was when the real work started, working alongside EduCampus, doing the work, and we did have lots of arguments, and constructive arguments. I don't frame that as a negative thing. But the learning point there was that it was a conversation about systems, which was bringing out arguments about processes, and that was healthy and that was constructive. But we'd already missed a trick by starting from that point, rather than from the processes. Again, I'm sure I'll mention that later on. Also, during that time, what was a real struggle was for business users like me to an extent, but more importantly for my teams, to see this, to envisage the system in a functional context, to think, what is the day-to-day reality of that going to be like? And partly that was down to our inexperience at working with a supplier like EduCampus, and not having the confidence or experience to challenge things. So I've had lots of conversations recently with colleagues at other institutions, including one in Ireland, who are on a change journey, who've come to us and said, well, on points of detail, Ellucian have told us this. Ellucian have told us we have to do it this way. And we've said, no, you don't. You really, really don't. Because we've now got that experience to say, you can challenge that. You don't have to accept what the supplier says as being the only way of doing things. But that lack of tangibility, that sort of abstract sense of what we were doing, was arguably a vacuum into which some, I won't say bad design decisions, but certainly hasty design decisions were made. So again, trying to look at things in a kind of real lived context is something that I wish we'd done. In September 2018, we went live with the admission system, and in September 2019, Banner became our student record system. And yeah, again, there's a logic to that, as you can see, in terms of timing. There's a, broadly speaking, there's a, not completely so, but broadly speaking, there's a September to September kind of admissions cycle. So it kind of made sense to do it like that. But again, going back to my point about making hasty design decisions, because we had an earlier deadline for delivery of the admissions piece, we had to make earlier decisions, which then impact on the student records piece. So that kind of makes sense. So, again, whilst there was a logic to that sequencing, in terms of the program management, what would have been better would have been to say, okay, that's how we're going to do it, but we must make design decisions cognizant of the full implementation, the full range of functions that we're talking about here. And the solutions, which I think I've mentioned, Ellucian Banner 9 as the student record system. We were very fortunate timing-wise in that we went live with Banner 9 from the off. I know that colleagues at other institutions have been on a big transformation journey between Banner 8 and Banner 9. CRM Recruit is our admissions system. It is a separate system from Banner. And Argos was the reporting tool that we attached to it. And again, this presentation isn't about the system specifically, but if any, whatever stage you're at in your Banner implementation journey, if you're on one, I will evangelise about Argos endlessly. It was kind of sold to us as a bit of an add-on in the process, almost an afterthought, and we absolutely could not do our jobs without it. So I'll happily talk to colleagues about that if interested. And as others have alluded to, as part of our IT strategy, all of this is cloud-based. Cloud first is one of the fundamental points of our current IT strategy. What were the big challenges? Well, obviously, buy-in was a very big challenge. With all of that institutional memory around the old system, around EXIS, some colleagues were simply not convinced by the case for change. Some weren't happy with the choice of the solution, but that's kind of inevitable. We're always going to have that. We're talking about, as I say, 3,000 staff indirectly impacted, and certainly those directly impacted running into the hundreds. So that's always going to be a challenge. Trust was definitely a big challenge, and I think I've made that line a bit too wordy and abstract, but there's definitely at Oxford Brookes, and I'm sure at some of your institutions as well, an institutional currency of experience and knowledge that is valued. He knows what he's doing, she knows what she's doing because she's been doing it for 20 years. And hugely valuable, but the kind of trust that is instinctively trusted and it's slightly distinct from expertise, and it was finding the right balance between the two was difficult. And in that context, I would say that the leadership of the programme, the sponsorship of the programme was overly directive at times, and the approach, the sponsorship changed during the life of the programme, but the early approach from the sponsor was, these people don't like this because they don't like change, but change is happening, so they're going to have to get used to it. That's not helpful. That's really not helpful. It might be true, but it's not a helpful approach. And things became better, as I say, when the sponsorship changed and a more inclusive approach was taken. And of course, fear. I mentioned the screens earlier. Fear of change, fear of the unknown, but fear of not seeing the same screens. That's kind of kind of real. Like I say, if you're an academic in an institution like Oxford Brookes, then your office, your faculty, the virtual learning environment, that's the thing that you kind of associate with your working life. If you work in our nursery, you think of the children and parents that you see, and if you work in a team like mine, you think about the screens. But associated with that was definitely the fear of not being experts anymore. Going back to my point about the institutional currency of experience as opposed to expertise. That's knowledge that it's always tempting for some colleagues to guard too closely rather than share. That sense of being the expert on those screens because you know how to fix them when they go wrong. You know the little workarounds that you can do when they don't quite function as you'd expect them to. That's kind of scary for people. And in terms of sort of translating a big picture digital transformation vision into something that's meaningful for colleagues who want to go in and do a really, really good job, that's definitely something that needs to be taken into consideration. And of course, it's a big culture change. It was in Jason's definition a minute ago. Culture, giving up control. It wasn't our thing anymore. And again, that point about process and the thing that we didn't tackle as well as we should. Having the courage to say this is a cultural change. This is not just about doing the same things that we used to do on screens that look a bit different. This is about doing things differently, and that's difficult, and it's resource intensive, and we should have given more time to it. What were the hidden challenges? Time and input. This is kind of obvious, but I couldn't not share it. It's really hard to overestimate what's required in terms of the time that you need from subject matter experts, and that's not just about them bringing the expertise to the project. It's about the long-term buy-in as well. Where that worked well, where we got subject matter experts seconded out of the business and onto the project and working full time on this. That was brilliant. That was genuinely transformative because some of those colleagues, I can think of a few examples, started off as big resistors to change and then became investors in the solution. And we'll still say they're now doing in many cases vastly different jobs. But some of you will come up about a thing that they worked on the project. They go, I did that. I worked with Marcus on that or whatever. Assumptions, and this is more on the supplier side and to some extent on the strategic partner side, an assumption that what's worked at another university will work at Brookes, and partly that that points to the culture piece, but also all institutions are different, and that was the kind of sometimes those assumptions were only discovered when it was almost too late. So it's really about marrying that the expertise that these projects can't succeed without with the experience of what the local environment is like. Expectations. I remember a conversation during that implementation period. I was sitting with our Vice-Chancellor at a senior management conference, and we were not even talking about this project. We were having a kind of a group discussion about making efficiency. I think it was about making efficiencies. And the Vice-Chancellor said, well, of course, we'll have some efficiencies soon because we'll have a new student record system. And I said, what? And he said, well, you bring a new student record system, you get efficiencies. And I said, perhaps with career limiting haste, no, you don't. It really doesn't work like that. But that expectation, we found out subsequently that unfortunately for us wasn't just a conversation at a conference. Those assumptions have been built into our financial plans without anyone talking to us. So that was an interesting series of conversations. Scale, a completely new way of working. Hard to underestimate the challenges of moving from an in-house system to something that you're reliant on suppliers about. But also, as I said there, digital transformation doesn't happen in a vacuum. You can't separate the system change, the cultural change, from those considerations about structure and roles and resource. And that was a real challenge, because I think that I'm not saying we didn't succeed and innovate in quite a lot of areas, but it's I think again a starting assumption was this is a system change project, and of course it's not a system change project. It's an institutional change project. It's a cultural change project. Ooh. Seem to be missing a slide. The slide that you can't see describes the lived experience. So what was it actually like? It was massively impactful on the day-to-day. So again, do not underestimate the impact on the day-to-day, just the sheer pressure, time pressure, but also kind of pressure for brain space, for emotional engagement, of being involved in the implementation while keeping the lights on. Some invisible but perceptible decisions and distinctions between colleagues, and I don't wish to kind of make this sound more Lord of the Flies than it actually was, but there were certainly colleagues who were very conscious, very proactive, change makers, advocates for the new system, and others, very conscious resistors. That was difficult. That was again, maybe it was inevitable, but that was a difficult challenge. I saw an interesting change project showcased by the University of Exeter at a conference a few years ago. This was a structural change. They were reforming all of their student-facing services, moving them from faculties into the centre, but with hub and spoke and all that sort of thing. Really good change project. And what they did, and I don't think I would advocate going this far, was they literally gave people badges. They worked out how people were impacted by this particular change, whether they were moving from a faculty to the centre or otherwise, or staying where they were, and they literally gave people badges. So wandering around the University of Exeter in the southwest of England a few years ago were lots of professional services colleagues wearing either a yellow badge or a blue badge, depending on where they were, which was kind of envisaged as a visible symbol of, we're all engaged with this change. That's an interesting approach. I don't know if the Exeter colleagues tell me it worked well, and it certainly seems to have done. But I think that somewhere between our Oxford Brookes' experience of the slightly factional element that it felt like, and that sort of very visible, indeed colour-based engagement with change is probably ideal. Colleagues' confidence eroded as the implementation approached. And again, that relates to a number of things I've said, but that fear that when we turn this new system on, I won't be able to do my job, and I take pride in my job. I want to be able to do my job, and eroding that confidence was a challenge. But as I also, on the positive side, a lot of colleagues finding a newfound confidence in engaging with tech and engaging with digital strategy. Non-technical colleagues working alongside consultants, developers, etc., and being co-creators of those solutions. Whether that's a self-service page for generating council tax exemption letters, or a back-end process for managing fee income, colleagues working non-technical colleagues working alongside those technical colleagues, and taking a real newfound pride in innovation and being part of a technical transformation. When we did go live, September 2019, there was way too much change at once. It was pretty chaotic. It's kind of an obvious lesson in change management, but at the same time as we changed the student record system, we separately changed a few key processes around enrolment and module registration, and I think something else as well. And it was pretty chaotic. So kind of obvious, but link these things up. Don't do them in isolation with each other. What worked well? What were the success stories? We had a really clear governance structure. We had a design authority which had representation from across the institution, and we had a programme board, and there was a really clear and transparent governance structure there. And having that representation, that participation was absolutely invaluable. honesty, that was something that kind of evolved during the life of the project. We moved from a sales pitch kind of vibe about the project communications. This is going to change your life. It's going to be better. Everything's going to be shinier and newer and faster and all of these things. And people started to challenge that and say, well, you don't know that. You don't know that yet. And actually the buy-in was much greater when that honesty moved from the sales pitch approach to something that was more realistic, to something that was saying, yeah, some things are going to take longer, but these things are going to be quicker and better. That was a much more successful engagement. And humanity, recognising and acknowledging the impact on colleagues. As I mentioned a minute ago, colleagues don't just want to do their jobs. They want to do their jobs well, and the systems that they are familiar with are a big part of that, a huge part of that. And a kind of light bulb moment for me was when I was talking with. We had a team away day not long before we went live, and I could literally see the fear in colleagues' faces, and expressing exactly those concerns. And I just remember saying, it's not the system that makes you good at your job. It's not Exis that makes you good at your jobs. As familiar and sort of, as familiar as it is, as much muscle memory as you have with when to press F2 and when to press F3, that's not what makes you good at your job. What makes you good at your job is the dedication that you show to it, the teamwork, the collaboration, the innovation, all of those good things. That was, wish I'd thought of that earlier in the project, but as I say, kind of a light bulb moment. What would we do differently? I've mentioned this a few times. We should have spent much more time on processes and less on systems. It's not as if we weren't warned about this. We didn't challenge our processes before or during implementations. A point that Ronan made very well earlier. It's not about replacing one system with another. Everything's going to have to be different. So let's challenge how we do things. That's something that we really should have done. Take a whole process view. As I've mentioned a few times, the project was way too atomised. There were different work streams for those different functional areas, necessary to have that focus on different functional areas in order to get the detail of those things right, but nowhere near enough of a whole process view, hence my observation earlier about certain design decisions being made about admissions, which had unknown consequences for the student record, and still unpicking some of those. Again, kind of obvious, give more time, more programme time, more resource to change management as a function. The impact, the input needed from the business to a change project like this, it's just immeasurably more than a number of colleagues would assume. I definitely give more time to usability and integration, and really challenge, again, not only the processes, but the value. So a big problem that we're still wrestling with is that our old student-facing portal, as clunky as it was really, really well used. It was a source of truth for students. The new one, people keep telling me students don't go to it. And I keep saying, but that's where my team publish their exam results. Surely they go to it. No, they don't. They talk to their lecturers. They rely on what's sitting in the VLE. So we didn't give enough time to actually get thinking about, what's the value of this system going to be to end users, and including, staff and the whole students and the whole staff community in that. And again, teaching you all to suck eggs, I'm sure, but get strategic alignment before starting. At the point that we went live with this, we didn't actually have a digital strategy. We've got one emerging now. But in the absence of a digital strategy, in the absence of a strategy that says this is how we approach digital at Oxford Brookes, we made some hasty decisions. I think the other thing I wanted to mention, sorry, another slide dropped out, is that 3.5 years after implementation, we are continuing to evolve our use of both systems. We have improvement projects going forward to our strategic change board tomorrow, I think, to continue the evolution of these systems. And that's been a real challenge to get us to realise as an institution, to get senior managers to realise that the implementation of this thing is not something that stops. It's constant. It's evolving. That's how you get value out of it. Also that one of the reasons we're in a strong position to do that is because when a closure report was written by the product owner, just before he was snapped up by Lucian, that addressed not only the items that were on the backlog, the things that hadn't been implemented by the project, but also the disbenefits. And it's really important to be honest about that, to say, yeah, we've done all of these good things, that's good, these benefits have been realised. But actually, these things take longer now. These are disbenefits, so we need to kind of keep working on that. That's where we are. We do have, I'll try and get this slide back in what's circulated. We've got a blue plaque on the wall of our office, and if you could see it on the screen, it's blue plaque is I've noticed when I was wandering around Dublin yesterday that you have plaques of a different colour to mark points of historical importance of where things have happened in history or where important people have lived. In the UK, we have a system of blue plaques. And we have one on the wall of our office, which, if you could see it, would say EXIS, Higher Education's Finest Database, served here 1994 to 2019. So we do still remember it with affection, but we're definitely over it now. Do you want to take questions now?
Yeah, we'll take some questions, I think. Is there any specific questions for Gavin? Oh, yeah, there we go. So, Clodagh.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thank you very much. Great presentation there. I was just caught by one particular point. You said by Acton have arguments and that kind of thing. The outcome of that, did that mean that the supplier had to do a lot of local customizations?
Not customizations, but definitely we were pretty hard with the supplier on how we wanted to configure. We're obviously not keen on customizations for obvious reasons. I mean, things still break when it upgrades, as I'm sure you're familiar with. But it was more about where we could going back to Lucian and saying no, that you're presenting this as the optimal, the only means of implementing a compliance checker for students' academic performance, etc. We know that it can be done better, and kind of going and sort of drilling down and taking a bit more time there. So not customizations as such, but more challenging the approach. Does that answer your question?
Kind of, yeah. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Gavin. Hugely interesting and so many things to pick up on. But yourself and I think our previous speaker as well have touched on a couple of times the idea of the value proposition. And I just wanted to kind of dive into that a little bit and ask you, for example, as you said, it's a cultural or institutional change, cultural change as much as it's the digital transformation. When you're looking at automation of things or making things that are back-end processes a bit more straightforward, and you're looking at the value proposition at that in the round, if you like, not just to the person who does that. If it's a time-saving issue, and the value of that actually is obviously the time to the person, but the bigger value might be that person's expertise can then be front-facing with the student, whether it's face-to-face or online. Did you have any ways to kind of metric that, if you like, or to look at that in terms of the value proposition, or is that kind of an angle that you might look at if you were doing it again, if that makes sense?
Yeah.
Thank you.
It does. No, thank you. We had some metrics associated with that. It's really difficult to do it on a project of such large scale, but certainly in terms of reducing avoidable contact, which is a bit of a cliche from UK local government days, but still quite a valuable metric. If we're presenting something as self-service that used to be done manually, let's measure that not only in terms of how many times it's clicked on, but what's the time saving for exactly the purpose that you describe. So definitely some sort of measurable benefits there in terms of processes. I think kind of part of the value proposition is on a more staff-facing level is getting colleagues to realise that they've done digital transformation without realising it. Does that kind of make sense? That people who are worried about the implications of a new system coming in, sort of getting them also to look back, because one of the challenges with change or additions or doing things differently. Is or what are you going to, what are we going to stop doing? If we've got to do all this new stuff, what are we going to stop doing? But actually, when you talk to colleagues and say, well, think back to how we used to let academics know which students with disabilities needed reasonable adjustments. That we used to have the clunkiest process in the world for doing that, and between us, entirely, without deep technical innovation, we changed that before we even thought about a new student record system. We did that. So actually, we have stopped doing stuff. We have already moved on because we innovated, and that's the same journey we're on now. It's just we're looking at it in a different way.
I always have this moment of panic when someone hands me a microphone as to what song I'm supposed to be singing. Thank you so much. That was really very helpful. I just have a question there about the student portal.
Yeah.
And the issues you're having. Do you have a workaround? Are you in talks with Lucian about the clunky student portal?
We need to. We're not particularly talking to Lucian about it, but we again, that's part of the internal improvement projects to invest in that side of things. Because are you from a banner using institution?
Yes.
Yeah.
We're just wondering, do you have the app? The student app?
No, we don't have the student app. Lucian keep trying to sell it to us. But going back to my point about strategic alignment, the reason we didn't want the app was because having the Lucian app immediately puts restrictions around what app you can how we might want to think about our students engaging with apps. We don't want to have an app that students go to do kind of the student record system stuff, and then another app for different things. So that was one of the reasons we pushed back on that. To the specific point about what we're doing though, rather than what we're not doing. Are you on Banner 9?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the extensibility tools for building really quite user-friendly forms are quite invaluable, and we need to invest more time on those. We need to invest more time on those simply to make them more accessible to students and more joined up and more seamlessly linked to the virtual learning environment, because they're entirely separate from each other at the moment. So we don't want to be beholden on Lucian for that, because we've got the tools.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your presentation. Very interesting and kind of reflective of our own experiences in some way in moving to Banner 9. One story in particular stood out, and that was on the passing of your colleague and losing that knowledge that they had and what they had done in the system. And we've experienced similar things in our institution, although it was less tragic. And I'm just wondering, inevitably there will probably be a move to Banner 9 or another non-Lucian student record system at some stage in the future. And what steps have you taken to make sure that those processes and that knowledge that individuals hold, that won't be repeated when inevitably there's a change in the future?
Really good question. When I took this job at Brooks in late 2012, my first task was a restructuring and to bring 5 departments together into one. So I went round to each of the various departments to find out about their processes, their work, what was important to them. And I sat with, remember sitting with a colleague who still works in the team, and they explained what they do, the student records team. This is how we process a withdrawal. This is how we, manage the exam committee hours or something. And I said, okay, where's all that written down? And she literally picked a notebook up off her desk and said, it's all in here. And I said, right, but where else is it? It's nowhere else. It's all in here. I'm like, right. So if that, if the building burns down when we're all asleep, or you leave it on a bus or something, that's gone. Yeah, that's gone. That's where we were in 2012. What we've got now, I mean, the factual answer is we have loads and loads of resources on Google Sites that we've built, which describe these processes. So the technical documentation is all in service now and is constantly checked by our IT colleagues. We have IT colleagues who are dedicated to this and who have a kind of, a KPI, if you like, around knowledge transfer, because we're kind of obsessed with it now for the reason. So it's all in ServiceNow, and ServiceNow, if you use it, gives you a really good kind of and a sort of semi-automated renewal schedule for updating the technical side of things. On the process side of things, that boundary between the procedural and the technical, we've got it all on Google Sites, which it's kind of part of our day-to-day to maintain. But the key point of that is not the mechanism for doing it, but the fact that the people who maintain that documentation, which has loads of screenshots and loads of banner talk and loads of stuff like that, are the users. They're not the techies, they're my team. That's part of their job to keep that updated and to have it as a resource. And it's kind of it's part of our culture now. Anybody new joins the team, the first day one of their induction schedule is read the Google site.
Thank you.
Just one question about, it's very interesting about the change management process and the things that you didn't do. And it just connects with something that Ronan said and Jason said earlier on about getting a culture of change management and getting into digital transformation away from the digital. Because I had one experience in Banner with the old GMIT about 12 years ago. I was dragged into a meeting as a kind of a user where we were discussing the implementation of Banner in Galway about 12 years ago. And it was a crisis point. Obviously, there was a lot of people who were very mad about the problems and how it wasn't working. There was a national team working on it. Then there was a local implementer. And at this meeting, a lot of people angrily banged the table about the problems that weren't working and the things that weren't as good as they used to be. And to every question, the answer from the national implementation team was, well, we'll fix that, we'll fix that, we'll fix that, we'll fix that. And then the local implementation manager banged the table, and she lost her temper because she had been asking the same questions for 6 months and had got no's to everything. But now that the users were mad, it was getting... So it was just the difficulty of getting that change process for a big IT project was that the communications weren't there. I mean, probably the technical system worked fine and everything, but the communications weren't there. And I see now that as a result of COVID and also because of the cybersecurity, we're changing our IT infrastructure at an order of magnitude faster than we were back in 2002. It's vastly faster, and I don't see a big improvement in the communication strategy. I don't see that as being improved. So, and that's a cultural piece. I just wonder if you could speak to that, or any of the speakers could talk to how we can put in place a change management process which brings the users along a bit better.
Is that a good time to go into panel?
We actually might hold that one for the panel discussion. So if you just bear with us 1 second, I'm going to actually invite the speakers from earlier this morning up onto the stage. We're going to have a panel discussion where we can touch on your point and others as well. So I think we have a couple of mics actually from the back you can bring up. Yeah, thanks. Thank you. So Paddy, Fanula, Dr. Ryan, if you'd like to come up onto the stage. Thank you. And I'm just going to hand it over to Ronan. Thank you. Do you want to have your...
Yeah. So we'll probably try and mix here a couple of, let's say, facilitated questions and absolutely take that from the floor in terms of that. I think that question of change management, I think we'll stick exactly with your question there. It struck me that, Jason, you talked about ambition, you talked about culture being key foundations to any program. And then clearly, Gavin, I mean, you're through into change management and change managers as the topic of that. How just taking from yourselves, what's your thoughts in terms of managing change? Would you do the way you set up from the beginning? Would you do it differently? You obviously said you would have mapped processes and you would have set that. But did you set ambition? Did you set goals? Were they shared? And then did change, were you using that to drive change?
I think it's something that it kind of comes back to the a couple of questions ago from the colleague on this side of the room about the value proposition, and that's kind of what we didn't define. Now, partly that's because, as I said at the start of the presentation, the old system was about to fall over, so we kind of had to replace it. But in terms of getting colleagues on board, then I think we could have defined that better. But like I said in the talk, where and again to the colleague's point about communication, where things changed was when we were very, very honest with people, very, very honest with people, rather than the kind of slick it's all going to be amazing type approach. I think that was valuable.
Okay. And I'm very conscious that anybody want to contribute in terms of the same context. Yeah.
Can I just ask a follow-up question to Gavin's point with regard to, as your management of change concept, it evolved within the university, I think was the way that you spoke to it. Did you go out of house for support on how that management of change could happen, or was the skill set that was built up within the university over time? You referred to there was a change within the structure of the program about a year or a year and a half in. Just wondering, what has the university learned?
I think what we've learned, and we probably knew this already, is that, and what we now have is a much more centralised approach to change management. A much more centralised approach. So we did have external help. We had a strategic partner on board who had some expertise in change management, which was super helpful. They also, going back to a question from earlier, they also brought some technical expertise which they didn't really document, but that's a separate conversation. But in terms of the sort of lessons learned for change management at an institution like Oxford Brookes going forward, I mean, this is my natural approach to everything, but centralising that change management function during the life of this programme was and remains absolutely key. So, as of now, and I'm sure this is unpopular with some colleagues, not a penny of money can be spent on change unless it goes through a centralised governance process, a strategic change board chaired by the Chief Operating Officer. Literally that's tomorrow's task, is to go through, painfully go through about 40 rows on a spreadsheet of colleagues asking for money for things. But that's absolutely necessary to achieve that alignment.
And just for clarity, that external consultancy was not a Lucy who were doing.
No, that was the strategic partner was PA Consulting. That's I think that's a matter of public record. But interesting. I referred to the before we got into implementation, we did a make or buy evaluation, and we got some consultants in to do that. I won't name them, but they're very, very, very well known. And they were the guys that came and said, right, yeah, we can help you with this. We can do the evaluation. Honestly, it was one of the worst pieces of work I've ever seen in my entire life. Now that very, very big consultancy firm, then bid for the strategic partner tender and didn't get it.
A lesson learned. Can I ask Phil? I'm just going to ask you a question, and it's probably related to some of that change, but kind of a scope question, because sometimes that change management, we start off with a vision, and sometimes those projects, and obviously EduCampus is heavily involved in some of these very large projects. And it's one thing to say, we'll deliver X change, and it's a different thing to say, well, we understand what that is and how we're going to do it. And we're somewhat or EduCampus is somewhat on the hook to, I mean, they are projects between vendors and projects of the institutions, but at the same time, you're the ones helping to drive those projects forward. How do we manage scope practically with the client? How do we provide governance around scope? How do we provide governance to ensure we deliver what we set out to in terms of the value proposition, etc., and yet manage scope?
Well, that's a huge question. I think it is a big challenge for EduCampus and for our clients. What we put in place is very strong governance. You can't do it without strong governance in partnership with the clients. And as Gavin said, managing every request for change to see, is it necessary, If it is necessary, where is the budget coming from? What will the impact be on the programme? It's that level of scrutiny has to be there for every single change. There's no other way to do it. It can be time consuming and tedious, but it's absolutely vital to making sure that your scope stays tight. Obviously, it goes without saying that you've defined your scope in the first place, and you have clarity between EduCampus and the client and the supplier across all parties at the very beginning on what that scope is going to be, what you're going to deliver, and then you manage the changes as you go along. And it's inevitable that there will be requests for change, but trying to minimise those while making sure that you're delivering on what the overall scope that you set out to deliver.
And I'm very...
Any questions from the floor? Can you take the mic down? Okay. Here. Oh, great.
Thanks very much. Maybe, Ronan, I just wanted to pick up on a comment you had when you were talking about sustainability, and maybe it's for the panel. When we think about digital transformation, we have to think about risk differently, I think. And obviously a big risk in some of this, and touching on the sustainability agenda, is cloud data centres. Like, we're in a situation in Dublin where I think they've had to kind of cut capacity on certain projects or limit some availability because of the physical grid. And maybe as an engineer, it's substations, it's transformers, it's not fibre optic or anything. Do you see it, as more and more stuff goes into the cloud, do we see this as a potential risk in terms of the physical infrastructure that's needed to run the cloud and the digital? And then where do we see that in terms of that broader SDGs and the sustainability agenda? Thank you.
I'll start, and maybe other people may have opinions. I'm going to say there's definitely an issue in the Irish economy given the growth of data centres overall. Does it directly risk any projects that I'm aware of? No. That's the honest truth. And the alternatives are worse, and that's probably the most important thing today to say. We've done detailed analysis for some customers on comparisons between the option of go to cloud or modernise our data centre. And there was substantial savings in terms of carbon emissions and other things, taking not just the off-the-shelf calculations, but doing genuine calculations for an Irish context of a data centre. And this is for a large utility in Ireland that you're probably well aware of. And the answer was cloud was substantially less. So the alternatives of somebody go and build their own server room, data centre, whatever we want to call it, the cyber risk associated with it, the overhead associated, the amount of infrastructure that they have to put in, the footprint that they will have in that will be larger. I guess that the challenge we have nationally is that we are effectively importing, let's say, compute load from other jurisdictions because we have such large amounts of hosting. And it's not even just the obvious, Azure or AWS or whatever. There's other data centers in that. And that's probably a national question associated. We are taking it into our head. But the alternatives as an organization of, do I build it myself or do I run the cloud? The cloud is a lower footprint in the emissions, and that's fairly undoubtedly the case, and it will continue to be then. That's where the innovation is. And equally, from a cyber perspective, the alternatives, like equally, you're doing comparison here on cyber risk and things like that. You go, no, the risk, it can be built very securely, very sustainably in the cloud, and I probably would prefer to be there.
Thank you.
Okay. Can I'm going to ask Joseph, Dr. Ryan, a question, I suppose, on the impact of this whole thing on the student experience. Is there genuine data coming back to it? I mean, you touched yourself on COVID shone a light on inequality because it was a totally digital experience, and there's definitely inequality in that digital experience today. What do you see as the digital experience for the student, and where do you see it going, and how do we address those while absolutely maintaining the quality of the education and the addressing the inequality?
Yeah, thanks very much, Ronan. And just as a preamble, if I may, just to complement two international speakers coming in from different parts of the UK, for Jason, for that system sense of it, and then Gavin yourself for the lived experience of change within an institution, which, as colleagues here said, harkens with our own experience. So thank you very much. To your question, Ronan, you're tempted to give the Chinese answer, like it's too early to say at this stage. It's but that's rather flippant. I certainly, number one, I don't speak for students, so to be very clear on that. Number two, the student cohort here is far more diverse and getting more diverse, to be clear about that. And third, students, if you take students in the round, allowing for my last point, they're still far more digitally native than someone of my generation is. So I'm very conscious of how people actually interact. Certainly in talking to student leaders, which we do constantly, the feedback we got from COVID was it wasn't as simple, it wasn't a binary equation for the students. And I don't know if the UK experience was the same. They very much wanted the access to the online piece, but they wanted that access as a complementary piece, not as the only piece. So there was a desire to be in person, but equally there was a realization of the power of technology. And equally, for all of us who've gone through lectures in our day and gone through this, your concentration can dip at a moment. You can miss a chain in the argument, one little bit in the chain, whereas if you could go back and replay the piece, you'd actually catch it. Students really like that. I see a number of librarians, colleagues here, and I know they'll pick up on this, the needs of students. I'm sure that's coming back as a feed. So I think students, Ronan, are much more nous about this, but also that their reaction to it is perhaps more complex than may be first apparent. Thanks.
I wonder if I just say something following on from that. We've tried to avoid using the term students because it's each student, and there's always a temptation to work on the average, and I've heard figures about what percentage of students want to be back on campus entirely, for example. And of course, you always have to take into account then the percentage that don't. And the position of an 18-year-old who is doing a full-time course at a university versus a single mother who's in her 30s and reskilling and trying to engage with the course are very different. One of the things that is our vital resource that we've got in Scotland is an organisation called Sparks, and that's with a Q, and it's about upskilling student representation. And I'm old enough to remember situations where a whole bunch of guys in suits sat around a table and discussed strategic matters of the university before we turned to the person in a t-shirt and jeans in the corner and say, and what does the student think? Rather than forming a partnership with the students on how this all goes forward. And that support has been vital. But and part of Sparks, I think that has been crucial to all of this, is recognising the diversity of that student body and not simply a representative trying to represent the whole in some sort of average way.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask a question, a bit more basic and mainly towards Gavin. I was interested in your presentation where you're saying there was a perception of cost savings implied in the change, and my question relates to costs. So was the perception there that because you were moving towards cloud, that it was going to be cheaper and therefore you're going to save on the sort of infrastructure side, or was it that you were going to save in terms of efficiency, in terms of people, and how was that factored in? Because you did mention it was factored into your plans without your knowledge.
It was definitely the latter. It was an assumption that because we were buying a system, and weren't having to maintain it ourselves, that things would be faster, things would be more efficient. And when I referred to the initial make or buy evaluation that took place, that piece of work takes a lot of responsibility for that, because it was kind of lazy and superficial and not very well thought out. But those assumptions that you could do things better with a new system kind of took root. Some of those efficiencies could have been realised, and whether in cashable terms or freeing up staff, if we'd interrogated the processes better, as I mentioned earlier. But because that didn't happen, the assumption was from some very senior managers, new system equals things will just happen more efficiently. That was the wrong assumption that was made.
And can I just ask a follow-up question? We found, I suppose, in the past where you implement new systems, the skill set you need for people is slightly different to come in, so you need new people to come in. Has your team increased as a result of the implementation of that system to support that now?
Yeah, and I think that the team are skilled in different ways. So yeah, we've brought more resource into the team, if sort of retrospectively rather than proactively. But they're upskilled in different ways. You know, colleagues, non-technical colleagues who would have looked at SQL in the way that, you know, I'm rubbish with languages. You know, if I looked at Portuguese or Gaelic or something, I wouldn't make any sense of it. But colleagues who previously would have looked at SQL in that way are now writing mass data update utility routines or writing Argos dashboards. So there's been that upskilling, and a piece that we did do well. And to pass on as a lesson learned was, you know, very simply and very tediously, but importantly, rewrite job descriptions. So it wasn't necessarily that the personnel changed. There was a certain amount of shift, but a lot of colleagues stayed ostensibly in the same role, but changes were made to their job description to reflect that sort of thing.
I just say ChatGPT could sort that out. We'll take one last question and then we're going to wrap up for lunch. Is anything else from the floor? Yeah.
Thanks. Just really interesting morning, and thanks for everybody. Just a couple of things that kind of struck me. Does the panel think there's an inherent contradiction between digital transformation as opposed to digitization and shared services? Because we heard a lot about culture and change, but we come into shared services typically looking at efficiency and effectiveness. So it's something that hadn't really thought of me today, but just with the emphasis on digital transformation being quite local, and yet where we want to make change, the better forces we go sectorally. So thank you.
Paddy, do you want to?
Yeah, I might come in on that one. I think, I suppose in the role that EduCampus have had, it's enterprise applications we've been delivering. And I suppose prior to that, my previous existence was business transformation across large-scale programs. And I suppose some of the comments I made earlier, I think in Gavin's situation in particular, going from an in-house situation to a situation where you're going to a packaged solution, be it whatever, a Lucene or whatever, is a massive transformation on so many levels. From a technology perspective, from adoption of technology, change in business processes, change in roles, responsibilities. And you're probably not there yet, Gavin, fully, but I think it takes probably 5 years for an organisation to come out the other end and be fully reformed and methodology. So come back to the question about the localisation piece. I think we manage that quite well at EduCampus, and maybe it's as we've matured, and I was talking earlier on about maturing along the transition continuum, that we're not just delivering systems and solutions, we're delivering change programs along with those and supporting the universities in achieving that, with an emphasis on identifying which part of that landscape is owned by the university and where we support it. So certainly, yes, the operation of the system, the management of it, the ownership of the how it's used locally, lots of ways the benefits and all of that is very much the universities. And our role is to support it. But I think what we bring to it as a shared service then is methodologies and approaches to doing that. How large-scale projects are implemented, the engagement with the supplier, how that's managed, and as Finola mentioned earlier on, the governance to support it. So that all those moving parts are in place, and it clearly identifies which parts are locally owned and which parts are owned by us and which parts are owned by the supplier. And hopefully it all comes together in a coherent way then through those large-scale deployments.
Okay. Look, thank you very, very much. I think we'll wrap. I think Finola is going to actually just sort of sum up the day and sum up thoughts from where we are.
Yes, thank you, Ronan. I'm conscious that I'm the only thing that stands between you and lunch, so I'll make it fairly quick. I'd just like to say a massive thank you to our speaker, Paddy, our CEO, talked about EduCamp's strategic direction and set that out very clearly for everybody. And then Ronan, I think, gave us a very insightful analysis of the key challenges in digital transformation. I know for me, the key concept that I liked particularly in that was the the concept of a minimum lovable product, because we do fall into the trap of talking about minimal viable product. Let's just deliver that, as the first piece of a project, and then let's move on. But it does have negative connotations, and as he said, as he rightly pointed out, it should be, whatever you're implementing, it should be lovable. It should be accepted by the users and should be usable by them. So I think that's certainly a concept I'll be taking forward. And then in the afternoon, post coffee break, I suppose, we moved on to Jason, and I think getting the exclusive site of JISC's framework for digital transformation. We're all privileged on that. But again, for me, the internet-enabled sparring, I think, is the one that will stay with me. And it's some technology that. And then Gavin, I think, as we saw from the interaction, Gavin's presentation around the digital change journey in Oxford Brookes, I think it has really resonated in the room, because so many of us are going through the digital change process. And I'd really like to thank all of the speakers for their insight. I also wanted to just again reference International Women's Day as the only woman up here, and that's not reflective of EduCampus. I think EduCampus is definitely very gender neutral, and as are most of the organisations that we work with. I do find that the UN's official theme for International Women's Day, which Joe referenced earlier, Digital, which is innovation and technology for gender equality. And certainly in my role in technology, I do have confidence in the power of innovation and technology to drive gender equality. I think it is, it's a very strong factor in levelling the playing field and allowing more women to access education in particular and other aspects. So I think overall it's been a very enjoyable morning, very interactive, and thank you all for your attendance. I'd also like to thank Version 1 for the sponsorship of the lunch and the refreshments, which we'll be enjoying in a few minutes. To Emer and her team in EduCampus for pulling the day together. I think it's gone very smoothly and excellent work there. So I think on that note, we'll head for lunch, and I look forward to catching up with all of you, over lunch, and in the future. You have our contact details in EduCampus. We're always open to discussions on any aspect that you'd like to follow up on. Thank you very much.